You have exactly 10 seconds to walk back through that gate, or I drag you through it myself." The hand came down on her shoulder before she could turn around. Thick fingers, deliberate pressure, the grip of a man accustomed to moving people who did not want to be moved. She felt the weight of it, not just physical, but territorial. A claim staked on her body without permission, without cause, without the slightest hesitation about what it meant to put hands on a woman standing in a place she had every legal right to be. She did not flinch. The man behind the hand was 6'3", 240 pounds, with a shaved head and a resort security polo stretched tight across his chest. His name was Colt Ramsey, head of security at Palmetto Shores Resort, and in 13 years of managing access to one of the most exclusive oceanfront properties on Kiowa Island, South Carolina, he had never once questioned whether his instincts about who belonged and who did not were anything less than flawless. He was about to discover that instinct and accuracy were not the same thing. The woman he was threatening to drag off the property would, in exactly 19 days, preside over the largest civil rights lawsuit in the District of South Carolina's history, a case bearing the name of the man who had hired him. But Colt did not know that yet. Nobody did. The posted sign beside the entrance gate, brass lettering on weathered wood, read clearly enough for the security camera mounted above it to capture every word. Palmetto Shores Resort welcomes all registered guests and visitors to public amenity areas, including the main lobby, beachfront promenade, and dining terrace during posted operating hours. Guest identification is required for pool, spa, and private event access only. Management. Revised January 2025. She had read the sign before Colt spoke. She had read it because reading posted regulations before entering any space was a habit she had developed over 23 years, a habit that had nothing to do with leisure and everything to do with a profession she had no intention of revealing. "I said 10 seconds. Colt squeezed her shoulder. Not hard enough to bruise, hard enough to communicate that the countdown was real. She looked at his hand, then at his face, then at the camera above the sign. "You're going to want to remove your hand," she said. Quiet. Not a request. A forecast. If this satisfying start already has you hooked, go ahead and subscribe. You won't want to miss what happens when the truth comes out. 7 hours earlier, the morning had started with salt air and a long drive. Joelle Mabry pulled her rental sedan, a mid-size Hyundai, silver, unremarkable, off Highway 17 and onto the tree-canopied road that connected the mainland to Kiowa Island. Sunlight filtered through the live oaks in broken patterns, turning the windshield into a strobe of light and shadow. It was 10:14 a.m. on a Thursday in late March, the kind of morning where the Lowcountry felt like it was exhaling. Warm, humid, slow. She wore a plain cotton blouse, linen pants, sandals with a low heel. No jewelry except a thin watch with a leather band and a pair of reading glasses folded into the collar of her blouse. Her hair was natural, pulled back with a simple clip. Her overnight bag sat on the passenger seat. Not a suitcase, just a canvas duffel from a department store, soft-sided, the kind of luggage that attracted no attention because it suggested nothing worth protecting. She had reserved 7 nights at Palmetto Shores Resort. The booking had been made 6 weeks ago through the resort's website, confirmation number PS-2025-03-7741, prepaid in full, Ocean View Suite on the 3rd floor. The confirmation email sat in her phone, time-stamped, receipted, unambiguous. She had chosen this particular resort because it was 47 miles from the federal courthouse in Charleston, close enough to return if an emergency required her presence, but far enough to constitute an actual break from the caseload that had consumed the past 14 months of her life. The guard booth at the island entrance processed her without incident. Resort name, confirmation number, driver's license scanned. The gate attendant, a young man with sunburned cheeks and a clipboard, smiled, handed her a temporary parking pass, and waved her through. The resort itself sat at the southern end of the island, where the beach curved in a long crescent, and the dunes were preserved by wooden walkways elevated above the seagrass. The main building was 3 stories of pale stucco and dark shutters, flanked by 2 wings of guest rooms, and anchored by a lobby with floor-to-ceiling windows facing the Atlantic. Money was visible everywhere, in the landscaping, the valet stand, the polished stone entryway, but it was the quiet kind of money, the kind that whispered rather than announced. Joelle parked in the guest lot, shouldered her duffel, and walked through the main entrance. Inside, the lobby smelled of cedar and sea salt. Her eyes moved in a pattern that had become involuntary over 2 decades. Left wall to right wall, ceiling height, exit count. 3 visible exits. Front entrance, side corridor to the pool deck, service hallway behind the concierge station. The movement took less than 2 seconds. No one noticed it. No one ever did. The front desk was a curved marble counter staffed by 2 attendants. The one on the left, a woman in her 30s with ash blonde highlights and a name tag reading Tessa Platt, property manager, looked up as Joelle approached. The smile that appeared on her face was the kind that required a decision, the kind that emerged after a brief internal calculation about who warranted warmth and who warranted efficiency. "Checking in?" Tessa said. "Yes, reservation under Mabry. Confirmation PS-2025-03-7741. Tessa typed. Her fingers paused. She typed again. The pause stretched from 2 seconds to 5, then to 8. Her brow furrowed with a precision that suggested the furrow had been deployed before, a rehearsed expression of concern designed to introduce a problem that did not exist until she decided it did. "I'm not finding that confirmation in our system," Tessa said. She turned the monitor slightly, as if inviting Joelle to see a screen she could not actually read from the other side of the counter. "Could you spell the last name?" "Mabry. First name Joelle. Joelle. More typing. More pausing. The second desk attendant, a young man whose name tag read Cooper, glanced over but said nothing. He had a guest of his own, a white couple in matching polos, who were being processed with the frictionless speed that confirmed their belonging before a single keystroke. "I have a Mabry, but it's showing as canceled," Tessa said. Her voice carried the particular brand of helpfulness that functions as obstruction. "It looks like the reservation was voided due to a payment processing error. I'm so sorry for the inconvenience." Joelle reached into her bag and retrieved her phone. She opened the email, expanded the confirmation, and placed the phone face up on the marble counter. Confirmation email, dated February 9th. Payment processed through a Visa ending in 4418. Charge cleared February 10th. No cancellation notice received. Tessa looked at the phone the way a customs officer looks at a passport they intend to question, not with interest in its contents, but with interest in finding a reason to reject it. Unfortunately, our system shows something different. I can check availability for alternative dates, or I can refer you to our sister property on Seabrook. I'd like to speak with the general manager. Mr. Harrington is unavailable today, but I can certainly leave a message. Then I'd like a printed copy of whatever cancellation notice was generated, including the date, the authorization, and the name of the staff member who processed it. The request landed with a weight Tessa had not anticipated. A printed record meant a paper trail. A paper trail meant accountability. And accountability was the one amenity Palmetto Shores did not advertise. "I'll need to check with our accounting office," Tessa said. "That could take—" "I'll wait." She said it without inflection, without impatience, without the rising pitch that would have given Tessa permission to categorize her as difficult. She simply stated a fact. She would wait. And the fact carried more authority than a raised voice ever could. Tessa disappeared into the back office. Cooper, the second attendant, shifted uncomfortably behind his monitor. The white couple in matching polos collected their key cards, their welcome packets, their complimentary sparkling water, and departed toward the elevator bank without a backward glance. Joelle waited. She stood at the counter with her phone face up and her duffel at her feet, and she waited with the stillness of a person who understood that patience was not passive. It was a weapon, and she had been sharpening it for 23 years. 9 minutes later, Tessa returned. No printed cancellation notice. Instead, she returned with a key card. "Good news. We found the error. A system glitch. Your reservation is active. I've upgraded you to a garden view suite on the 2nd floor as an apology for the confusion." Not the ocean view she had booked. The garden view was on the opposite side of the building, facing the parking lot and the maintenance shed. An upgrade in name. A downgrade, in fact. "I booked an ocean view on the 3rd floor," Joelle said. "Confirmation specifies room 312. That room is currently occupied. The garden view is actually quite lovely. Is room 312 occupied by the guest who booked it, or by someone who was reassigned after my reservation was moved?" Tessa's smile thinned. The question was precise enough to suggest familiarity with the mechanics of reservation fraud, the practice of bumping lower-profile guests to accommodate higher-value ones, then blaming the displacement on system errors that existed only in the staff's willingness to create them. "I can check," Tessa said. "Please do." Another disappearance, another return. This time, 6 minutes. "Room 312 is available. I apologize for the confusion." The keycard she placed on the counter was the same one she had offered before. Joelle looked at it, then at Tessa, then at the keycard again. "I'll need a new card. That one was programmed for the garden view." Tessa reprogrammed the card without speaking. The silence between them was no longer professional. It was adversarial, the silence of two people who understood exactly what had just happened, and whose only disagreement was whether it would be acknowledged. Joelle took the card, her duffel, and the elevator to the 3rd floor. Room 312 was exactly as advertised. Ocean view, king bed, a balcony overlooking the dunes, and the flat gray blue of the Atlantic beyond them. She set her bag on the luggage rack, opened the balcony door to let the salt air in, and sat on the edge of the bed. She pulled a small leather notebook from the side pocket of her duffel. Dark brown, soft cover, no markings on the outside. She opened it to a blank page and wrote 3 lines in precise handwriting. March 27th, 10:23 a.m. Front desk, Tessa Platt, property manager. Reservation initially reported canceled. No cancellation documentation produced. Attempted reassignment to inferior room. Resolved after 2 requests. Elapsed time, 22 minutes. She closed the notebook, placed it on the nightstand, and looked out at the ocean. She had not written the 3 lines because she was angry. She had written them because documentation was reflex. Because 23 years in a profession built on evidence had taught her that what goes unrecorded goes unremembered, and what goes unremembered goes unremedied. She did not know yet that the notebook would fill 27 pages before the week was over. The first afternoon passed without incident. Joelle walked the beachfront promenade, ate lunch at the resort's casual dining terrace, a Caesar salad, iced tea, a table near the railing where the breeze came in steady off the water, and returned to her room to read. She had brought 2 books, a novel she had been meaning to finish for 3 months, and a bound volume of Fourth Circuit appellate opinions from the previous term. She read the novel. The appellate opinions stayed in her bag. The trouble started the next morning. She came down to the pool deck at 8:45 a.m., early enough to claim a chair before the sun climbed high enough to make shade competitive. The pool was Olympic length, surrounded by chaise lounges with thick cushions, and staffed by 2 attendants who circulated with towels and water bottles. A dozen guests were already arranged around the perimeter. Couples, a few solo travelers, a woman in her 60s reading a magazine under an umbrella. Joelle chose a chair near the shallow end, spread her towel, and opened her book. "Excuse me?" The voice came from behind, pitched with the particular sweetness that conceals a blade. Joelle turned. A woman in her late 40s stood 3 feet away, wearing a white linen cover-up over a swimsuit that cost more than the chair she was standing beside. Her hair was salon perfect, her sunglasses were designer, and her expression carried the benevolent condescension of someone who had never been told no by anyone she considered her equal. "Could you grab a few extra towels from the cabana? The ones out here are too thin." The woman, her name, Joelle would learn later, was Deirdre Ashton, was not asking for a favor. She was issuing a directive to someone she had already categorized as staff. The categorization had taken less than 2 seconds. Joelle was black. She was at the pool early. She was alone. The arithmetic was that simple, and Deirdre had never questioned its accuracy because the world she inhabited had never required her to. "I'm a guest," Joelle said. Not defensive, not apologetic. Factual. Deirdre's smile did not waver, but something behind it recalibrated. The recalibration was not shame, it was inconvenience. She had been wrong, and being wrong required her to expend the social energy of a correction, which she resented more than the error itself. "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought..." She gestured vaguely, as if the mistake were the fault of the air between them, rather than the assumptions she had carried into it. "It's fine," Joelle said, because it was easier than explaining why it was not fine, and because explaining would accomplish nothing except confirming Deirdre's unspoken belief that black women who object to being mistaken for servants are overreacting. Deirdre retreated to her own chair, 3 rows away, where she was joined shortly by 2 other women of similar age, similar dress, similar certainty about the order of things. The 3 of them spoke in voices just loud enough to travel. Not whispering, not shouting, but occupying the acoustic middle ground where plausible deniability lives. And don't know how she got a reservation during Corbin's weekend. Probably some corporate diversity thing. You know how they have to fill quotas. Well, I hope she stays on her side of the pool. Joelle heard every word. She did not react to any of them. She turned the page of her novel and continued reading because she had learned, at 16, at 22, at 35, at 46, that the cost of visible reaction was always charged to her account, never to theirs. 20 minutes later, Colt Ramsey appeared at the pool deck. He walked with the unhurried swagger of authority on patrol, hands at his sides, jaw set, eyes scanning the perimeter the way someone scans for threats when they have already decided where the threat is. He wore the same security polo he would wear later that evening at the gate, khaki pants, and a radio clipped to his belt that crackled with the kind of static that announces jurisdiction. He approached Joelle's chair. Not Deirdre's. Not the woman in her 60s. Not any of the other guests who were identical in their right to be there, and different only in the characteristic that made Colt's selection inevitable. "Morning, ma'am. Do you have your room key?" She did. She showed it. He examined it the way he had examined nothing else that morning, turning it over, checking the room number printed on the sleeve, holding it at an angle as though the card itself might be counterfeit. "And your ID? Is identification required for pool access?" Resort policy. It was not resort policy. The posted pool rules, laminated and mounted on the cabana wall, listed 4 requirements: registered guest status, verified by room key, swimwear appropriate for a family environment, no glass containers, and no outside food or beverages. Identification was not among them. Joelle had read the posting when she arrived. She always read postings. "I'll show my ID if you can point me to the written policy requiring it." Colt's jaw tightened. The request was reasonable, which made it infuriating, because reasonable requests from people he had already categorized as problems disrupted the workflow of authority he had spent 13 years perfecting. He reached out and placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was not incidental. It was the kind of contact that exists on the border between guidance and force, firm enough to communicate control, gentle enough to deny aggression if challenged. He squeezed once, then turned her body slightly, as if redirecting a piece of furniture. "Let me walk you to the front desk. We can sort this out there." Joelle removed his hand. She did it the way a person removes a branch from a path, without haste, without violence, with the simple mechanical certainty that the obstacle did not belong where it was. "Don't touch me again." The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They carried the density of a statement that has been made before, many times, to many different hands, and has never once been optional. Colt stepped back, not because he agreed, because 3 other guests were now watching, and witnesses complicated the physics of encounters he preferred to conduct without observation. "I'm just doing my job, ma'am. Your job does not include putting your hands on a guest who has shown a valid room key and committed no violation of any posted policy." She said it clearly, loud enough for Deirdre Ashton to hear from 3 rows away, loud enough for the pool attendant to hear from the cabana, loud enough for the security camera mounted on the northwest corner of the pool deck, the one she had identified within 4 seconds of arriving, to capture every syllable. Colt retreated. Not apologetically. Strategically. He walked back across the pool deck, radio in hand, already composing the version of events that would justify what had just happened to anyone who asked. Joelle sat back down, opened her book, and did not read a single word for the next 30 minutes. She was too busy writing in the leather notebook she had retrieved from her bag. March 28th, 8:57 a.m. Pool deck. Colt Ramsey, head of security, requested room key, shown. Requested government ID, no posted policy basis. Physical contact, right hand on left shoulder, grip applied, body redirected without consent. Duration of contact, Approximately 3 seconds. Witnesses: 3 guests, pool area, 1 pool attendant, 1 security camera, NW corner, elevated mount. No verbal warning preceded contact. She closed the notebook. Her hand was steady. Her pulse was not. By Friday afternoon, her second full day at the resort, the architecture of exclusion had become visible. It was not a single act. It was a system, a series of small adjustments that collectively communicated a single message. You are tolerated here, not welcomed. The adjustments were distributed across staff and guests with the efficiency of an organism that does not require central coordination because every cell already knows its function. At lunch, the hostess seated her at a table beside the kitchen entrance, the only table without an ocean view, the table closest to the noise of clattering plates and shouted orders. When Joelle asked to be reseated, she was told the restaurant was at capacity. It was not. 2 ocean view tables were visibly empty. She documented, March 28th, 12:17 p.m. Hostess, name tag, Brianna. Seated at table 14, adjacent to kitchen service door. 2 visible vacancies at waterfront tables. Request to relocate denied. At capacity. At the spa, the receptionist informed her that all available appointment slots had been booked for the remainder of the week. Joelle asked to be placed on a cancellation list. The receptionist said no such list existed. An hour later, Joelle overheard Deirdre Ashton confirming a last-minute deep tissue massage for 4 p.m. the following day. She documented. At the business center, Joelle attempted to print a document from the public computer terminal. The printer required a guest access code. She entered the code printed on her room key sleeve. The terminal displayed, access denied, guest privileges suspended. She went to the front desk. Cooper, the young attendant from check-in, resolved it in under a minute, citing a system reset that affected a few accounts. He did not meet her eyes when he said it. System reset, system glitch, processing error, the language of institutional innocence, words designed to attribute human choices to mechanical failure, to distribute responsibility so thinly that no single person could be held accountable for what every single person had decided. Joelle documented all of it, not with anger, with discipline, because discipline was the scaffolding on which her entire professional life had been constructed, the ability to observe, record, analyze, and withhold judgment until judgment was warranted by evidence rather than emotion. It was a quality that had served her in every courtroom she had ever entered, and it would serve her here, where the courtroom was invisible, but the proceedings were just as adversarial. Late Friday afternoon, the escalation acquired a new participant. She was walking from the restaurant to the lobby, crossing the open-air corridor that connected the 2 buildings, when a man intercepted her. He was mid-50s, silver-templed, wearing a navy blazer over an open-collared shirt, and carrying a leather portfolio that matched his belt and his shoes with the coordination of someone who dressed to communicate expense. His smile was the kind that lawyers use when delivering bad news they intend to profit from. Ms. Mabry? Yes. Everett Dane. I'm outside counsel for the Whitfield Group. He extended a hand. Joelle did not take it. He withdrew it without acknowledging the refusal. I understand there's been some friction regarding your stay. I'd describe it differently. I'm sure you would. He opened the portfolio and produced a single sheet of paper, letterhead bearing the name Whitfield Group in embossed navy type. Mr. Whitfield has reserved the entire resort for a private corporate event this weekend. All non-affiliated guests have been asked to relocate to our sister property on Seabrook Island at no cost, with a complimentary upgrade. This letter confirms the arrangement. He held it out. Joelle took it. She read it in its entirety, standing in the corridor with the afternoon sun slanting through the palm fronds overhead. The letter was a masterwork of legal theater. It contained no court order, no contractual basis for relocation, no signature from the resort's general manager, no reference to any existing agreement between Palmetto Shores and the Whitfield Group that would override individual guest contracts. It was, in every way that mattered, a piece of expensive paper with an expensive name on it, designed to intimidate through presentation rather than substance. This isn't a legal instrument, Joelle said. It's a request on letterhead. Everett's smile did not falter, but his eyes recalculated. The response had been too precise, too fluent in the grammar of legal insufficiency, to come from someone unfamiliar with the territory. It's a courtesy notification. Mr. Whitfield's preferences are not binding on guests with prepaid reservations confirmed by the resort. If the resort wishes to cancel my booking, they can do so in writing, with the cancellation terms specified in their guest agreement, including the full refund and relocation expenses required under South Carolina's consumer protection statutes. She handed the letter back. Everett folded it into his portfolio, with the deliberate care of a man who had just discovered that the person he was negotiating with knew more about the negotiation than he did. "I'll convey your position to Mr. Whitfield," he said. "Please do, and please ensure he understands that any attempt to physically remove me from this property without a valid court order will constitute trespassing upon my person, not the reverse." Everett left. Joelle watched him go, then returned to the lobby and sat in one of the wingback chairs by the fireplace. She opened her notebook and wrote for 4 uninterrupted minutes. March 28th, 4:41 p.m. Everett Dane, Outside Counsel, Whitfield Group. Presented relocation letter. No legal basis, no resort signature, no contractual authority. Verbal claim. Whitfield reserved entire resort for private event. No documentation of exclusive use agreement produced. Letter retained by Dane. Noted. SC Code Section 39-5-20, Unfair Trade Practices Act, potentially applicable if resort cancels without contractual basis. She had cited the statute from memory. Accurately. This was not a coincidence. Saturday brought the event, and the event brought Corbin Whitfield. He arrived at noon in a caravan of black Escalades that swept through the resort's entrance gate with the theatrical efficiency of a head of state visiting a province. 3 vehicles, tinted windows, a security detail that preceded him into the lobby the way advance teams precede dignitaries, scanning, positioning, establishing perimeters that existed nowhere in the resort's actual policies, but everywhere in Corbin Whitfield's understanding of his own importance. Corbin Whitfield was 53 years old, the founder and chairman of the Whitfield Group, a conglomerate spanning real estate development, commercial construction, and technology infrastructure that had made him a billionaire by 40 and a Forbes fixture by 45. He was tall, angular, gray at the temples, with a jaw that looked like it had been designed by the same firm that designed his buildings. Sharp, geometric, expensive. He moved through the lobby without pausing at the front desk, without checking in, without performing any of the small rituals of arrival that ordinary guests submitted to as the price of temporary belonging. He did not notice Joelle. She was sitting in the same wingback chair she had occupied the previous afternoon, reading the novel she had finally returned to. She saw him, though. She saw the caravan. She saw the security detail. She saw the way the resort staff realigned their attention, the way flowers realign toward the sun, instinctively, collectively, without instruction. She turned a page and kept reading. The problems began within the hour. Tessa Platt appeared at her room door at 1:22 p.m. The knock was soft but persistent, the knock of someone who expected the door to open because the person behind it had already been classified as someone who would yield. Joelle opened the door. "Ms. Mabry, I'm so sorry to bother you. We have a small issue with your room. Maintenance needs to address a plumbing concern on this floor, and we'd like to relocate you temporarily." "Is there a plumbing issue in this room?" "It's a building-wide system." "Is there water damage in this room? A leak? A pressure drop? Any evidence of a plumbing failure that I should be aware of?" Tessa hesitated. The question demanded specificity, and specificity was the enemy of the manufactured crisis she had been instructed to create. "It's precautionary. I'll stay. If a legitimate maintenance issue arises, please have engineering contact me directly with a work order number and a description of the deficiency." She closed the door. Through it, she could hear Tessa standing in the hallway for 3 additional seconds before her heels clicked away on the tile. In the notebook, March 29th, 1:22 p.m. Tessa Platt. Attempted relocation. Claimed plumbing issue. No evidence of deficiency. No work order referenced. 3rd relocation attempt in 48 hours. By 3 p.m., the resort had divided itself into 2 territories, the public areas that belonged to everyone, and the private kingdom that Corbin Whitfield believed he had purchased along with the event package. The pool deck was cordoned off with velvet ropes and staffed by Whitfield Group security. The main dining room had been converted to a private banquet hall. The beachfront terrace, the one with the best sunset view, was blocked by a temporary podium and sound system being installed for an evening reception. Joelle walked to the beachfront promenade, the one public amenity area that remained accessible according to the posted signage. She carried her book, her towel, and the quiet certainty of a woman who intended to occupy the space she was entitled to occupy and would not apologize for the discomfort her presence created. She had been reading on a bench for 12 minutes when Colt Ramsey appeared again. This time he was not alone. 2 members of the Whitfield Group security team flanked him, younger, larger, wearing matching black polos with Whitfield Group embroidered on the chest. The formation was designed to communicate mass: 3 men, 1 woman, the mathematics of intimidation. "Ma'am, this area is closed for a private function." Joelle looked at the posted sign 10 feet to her right. It read, "Beachfront Promenade, open to all registered guests during resort operating hours." The sign says otherwise. "Sign hasn't been updated. We've secured this area for Mr. Whitfield's event." "Then you'll want to update the sign. Until you do, I'm a registered guest using a public amenity area during posted operating hours." Colt stepped closer. The 2 Whitfield security men stepped closer with him. The geometry tightened, 3 bodies forming a half-circle around a seated woman whose only weapon was a book and whose only defense was the law she had spent her career interpreting. "I'm asking you nicely, ma'am." "You're asking me to leave a space I'm legally entitled to occupy without a valid basis for the request. That's not nice. That's coercion." Colt reached for her beach bag. His hand closed around the strap and pulled. The bag slid across the bench and off the edge, contents spilling onto the wooden slats. A bottle of water, sunscreen, the leather notebook, a pen. Joelle stood. The movement was controlled, immediate, and carried the mechanical certainty of a reflex that has been trained into muscle memory. She took the bag back from his grip with a single firm pull. Her fingers closed around the notebook before it could slide through the slats. "You just seized the personal property of a resort guest," she said. "On camera." She pointed to the security dome mounted on the promenade railing, 15 feet to the east. "That constitutes common law trespass to chattels, and depending on how this proceeds, potentially assault under South Carolina Code Section 16-3-600. I would strongly suggest you return my belongings and step back." The legal language landed in the space between them like a foreign object, unexpected, dense, impossible to ignore. Colt's hand released the bag strap, not because he understood the citation, because the fluency with which she delivered it suggested a depth of knowledge that complicated his assessment of the situation. He stepped back, but he did not leave. He lifted his radio and keyed the transmit button. "Base, this is Ramsey. I need County Sheriff at the South Promenade. We have a guest who's refusing to vacate a secured area." The words were chosen carefully. Refusing to vacate is the language that transforms a legal occupant into a suspect. It is the language that authorizes escalation. It is the language that rewrites the story before the story is over. This story is about to take a turn you won't see coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a second of it. The evening before, Friday night, the restaurant incident had set the stage for everything that followed. Joelle had entered the resort's main dining room at 7:15 p.m. The hostess, Brianna, the same one who had seated her beside the kitchen that afternoon, looked up with the particular expression of someone who has been given instructions and is about to follow them. "I'm sorry, ma'am, the dining room is reserved for a private event tonight." "Is there a sign posted indicating the closure?" There was not. The entrance to the dining room displayed the same hours it had displayed all week. Open for dinner service, 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. Reservations recommended for parties of 4 or more. It was a last-minute arrangement. Mr. Whitfield's group. "I'm a single diner. I don't need a reservation, and the posted hours indicate the restaurant is open to all guests." Brianna's eyes flickered toward the back of the restaurant, where Deirdre Ashton was holding court at a large round table with 6 other women, all of them wrapped in the particular glow of expensive wine and exclusive access. Deirdre caught Brianna's glance and shook her head, a small, definitive motion that communicated everything without words. "I can offer you room service tonight," Brianna said. "Complimentary. I'd prefer to eat in the dining room." "Ma'am?" "Seat me." The word landed differently than a request. It was not aggressive. It was not loud. but it carried the weight of someone who had spent 23 years saying words that people obeyed, not because the words were threatening, but because the person saying them operated in a context where non-compliance had consequences. Brianna seated her. Table 9, not beside the kitchen this time, but not at the window either. A middle table, the Switzerland of seating arrangements, close enough to the private party to be visible and far enough to be technically separate. Joelle ordered. Grilled swordfish, roasted vegetables, sparkling water. She ate alone, with a novel propped against the water glass, occupying the space with the quiet certainty that she had every right to fill it. The disruption came at 8:04 p.m. Deirdre Ashton left her table and walked to Joelle's. She did not ask permission to approach. She stood beside the chair with one hand on the back of it and leaned down, her perfume arriving before her words. "I don't know who you think you are," Deirdre said, her voice pitched just below the level that would attract attention from other tables, but just above the level that would allow Joelle to pretend she had not heard. "But Corbin paid $250,000 for this weekend, and he did not pay it to share the dining room with—" She paused. The pause was where the word she wanted to say lived, the word she swallowed because she knew its sound would betray what its meaning already had. "With people who weren't invited." "I wasn't invited to the event," Joelle said. She set down her fork. "I was invited to the resort, by the reservation I paid for, which entitles me to every public amenity listed in the guest agreement, including this dining room. You don't belong here." The sentence was 4 words. It was also the oldest sentence in the American vocabulary of exclusion, a sentence that has been said to black people in restaurants and hotels and courtrooms and boardrooms and voting booths and swimming pools and country clubs for 400 years, with the same inflection, the same certainty, the same absolute confidence that belonging is a privilege bestowed by people who look like Deirdre and revoked from people who look like Joelle. Joelle picked up her fork. "Go back to your table, Deirdre." The use of her first name, spoken without permission, without introduction, without the social preliminaries that Deirdre considered her birthright, hit harder than any argument. It said, "I know who you are," and it implied, "I am not impressed." Deirdre's wine glass trembled in her hand. She set it down on Joelle's table, not gently, not violently, but in the particular liminal space between accident and intention. The base of the glass caught the edge of Joelle's water glass, both tilted. The sparkling water spilled across the tablecloth, across Joelle's bread plate, and into her lap. Joelle stood. The water soaked through her linen pants, cold against her thighs. She looked at the spreading stain, then at Deirdre, then at the security camera mounted in the corner of the dining room ceiling. "That was deliberate," she said. "It was an accident." Deirdre's smile returned, the smile of someone who understood that accidents and intentions occupy the same legal space when the only witnesses are people who have already chosen whose version to believe. Brianna appeared with napkins. The busboy appeared with a fresh tablecloth. The machinery of service activated to erase the evidence of what had just happened, smoothing and wiping and replacing until the table looked as though nothing had occurred, which was, of course, the point. Joelle did not sit back down. She left her half-eaten swordfish on the table, walked to the lobby, and went to her room. She changed her pants. She opened her notebook. She wrote for 7 minutes without stopping. March 28th, 8:04 p.m. Dining room incident. Deirdre Ashton approached my table uninvited. Verbal confrontation. "You don't belong here." Physical contact. Placed her wine glass on my table, struck my water glass, spilled liquid into my lap. Claimed accidental. Security camera present. Ceiling mounted, east wall, dining room. Witnesses: Brianna, hostess. Busboy, no name tag visible. 6 guests at Ashton table. She set the notebook down. Her hand was not shaking, her jaw was tight. In the dining room, Deirdre returned to her table. The women around her leaned in. The conversation that followed was inaudible from any recording device, but the laughter that punctuated it carried through the restaurant's open windows and into the warm March night with the unmistakable frequency of cruelty shared among friends. Saturday morning brought a new escalation. At 9:20 a.m., Joelle attempted to access the resort's fitness center. The door required a room key. She swiped hers. The reader blinked red. Access denied. She tried again. Red again. She walked to the front desk. Cooper was there, the same young attendant who had resolved her business center lockout the previous day. "My key isn't working for the fitness center," Cooper typed. Paused. Typed again. The same theatrical rhythm that Tessa had employed at check-in. The performance of searching for a problem that has been deliberately created. "It looks like your access was restricted due to a hold on your account." "What kind of hold?" "I'd need to check with the property manager." "Then check." Cooper disappeared into the back office. He returned in 4 minutes. "Ms. Platt says there's an outstanding damage claim on your room. Until it's resolved, some amenities may be temporarily restricted." "What damage?" "I don't have the specifics. I can have Ms. Platt call you." "There is no damage. I have not damaged anything in my room or on this property. Remove the hold." Cooper's discomfort was visible, the discomfort of a young person caught between institutional pressure and individual conscience. He wanted to help. He was not permitted to. "I'll escalate this to management," he said. It was the kindest version of no available to him. Joelle did not argue. She returned to her room, photographed every surface, every piece of furniture, every fixture, 32 photographs documenting the undamaged condition of room 312 at 9:37 a.m. on March 29th. She saved them to her phone's secure folder, alongside the photographs she had already taken of every posted sign, every resort policy, and the entrance to every public amenity area she had been denied access to. She checked the minibar. Untouched. She checked the bathroom fixtures. Intact. She checked the closet door, the balcony slider, the curtain rod, the desk lamp. Everything was exactly as it had been when she arrived, and now it was all photographed, time-stamped, and filed. In the notebook, March 29th, 9:37. AM Fitness Center access denied, room key deactivated. Cooper stated damage hold on account. No damage exists. 32 photographs taken of room 312 documenting condition. No damage claim documentation provided. No inspection conducted. Fourth restriction of amenity access in 48 hours. The pattern was now undeniable. Not a series of accidents. Not system glitches. A campaign, coordinated or emergent, it did not matter which, because the legal standard for discriminatory treatment did not require proof of conspiracy. It required proof of pattern, and the pattern was writing itself in the pages of her notebook with the relentless clarity of a brief that no opposing counsel could effectively challenge. At 10:15 a.m., she walked the resort's main corridor toward the lobby. Halfway down the hall, she passed Corbin Whitfield's entourage arriving for the day. A stream of men and women in business casual, carrying laptops and branded tote bags, the uniform of a corporate retreat that disguised itself as leisure. One of them, a man in his 30s with a Whitfield Group lanyard, stepped directly into her path. "Excuse me, staff entrance is around the back." He pointed over his shoulder without breaking stride. She did not respond. She stepped around him and continued walking. The man did not look back. The assumption had been made and discarded in the same breath. So automatic, so unremarkable to the person making it, that it did not even register as a choice. He had simply looked at her and seen someone who served, not someone who stayed. And the ease of that assessment, the frictionless certainty of it, was perhaps the most damaging thing about the entire week. Not the locked doors or the canceled reservations or the spilled water or the hands on her body. The ease, the absolute unchallenged ease with which every person she encountered arrived at the same conclusion about who she was and what she deserved. At noon, she ate lunch at the dining terrace, the outdoor section that remained open to all guests. She sat alone, ordered a Cobb salad, and read 3 chapters of her novel. No one bothered her. The outdoor terrace, it seemed, was beneath the notice of the Whitfield Group's social perimeter. Or perhaps they had simply run out of mechanisms to exclude her from spaces that could not be locked or roped or reassigned. She did not know that the afternoon would bring the final escalation. That Colt Ramsey was, at that moment, briefing his team on the ongoing situation with the unauthorized guest. That Tessa Platt had already drafted an email to the resort's legal department requesting authorization to terminate the guest agreement. That Deirdre Ashton had called Corbin directly, interrupting his pre-event briefing, to complain about the woman who ruined dinner last night. The machinery was in motion, and Joelle, sitting on the promenade at 2:45 p.m. with her book and her towel, and the quiet certainty of a woman who knew her rights was about to discover what happened when institutional machinery met a person it was not designed to process. Then she went back to the promenade. The ocean, the bench, the book. The quiet assertion of her right to exist in a space that the institution around her was systematically contracting. That was where Colt found her again, with the 2 Whitfield security men, with the geometry of intimidation, with the radio call that would bring Deputy Garland Moss and everything that followed. Deputy Garland Moss arrived at 4:11 p.m. in a Beaufort County Sheriff's cruiser that rolled up the resort's service road with the casual authority of law enforcement entering friendly territory. He had received the call 12 minutes earlier. Trespassing complaint, female subject, uncooperative. The language of the dispatch had already written the first draft of his conclusion before he arrived. Moss was 51, 23 years with the department, a man whose career had been shaped by a particular understanding of order, an understanding in which the people who paid for things got to decide who stayed, and the people who objected to that arrangement became the problem. He found Joelle on the promenade bench. She was sitting. She was reading. She was doing precisely nothing that constituted criminal activity under any statute in the state of South Carolina. "Ma'am, I've received a trespassing complaint." She looked up, marked her page, set the book aside with the deliberate, unhurried movements of someone who had been through this before and knew that speed would be interpreted as guilt. "I'm a registered guest of this resort. My reservation is current, prepaid, and confirmed. I have the documentation on my phone. Can I see some ID?" She produced her driver's license. Moss examined it, noted the address, Columbia, South Carolina, and returned it. "The resort says you've been asked to leave. The resort's property manager has attempted to relocate me 3 times in 48 hours, each time citing a different justification, none of which was supported by documentation. I've declined each request because I have a valid reservation that the resort has not legally canceled." Moss shifted his weight. The response was comprehensive in a way he had not anticipated. Most trespassing calls were simple. Someone was somewhere they were not supposed to be. They were told to leave. They either left or they didn't. This was different. This woman was articulating a contractual defense with the precision of someone who had read the statute and the guest agreement and understood how the two intersected. "Well, the property owner has the right to ask anyone to leave for any reason. Not once a contractual relationship has been established through a confirmed and paid reservation. At that point, the guest has a licensee's right of occupancy that can only be revoked through the procedures specified in the agreement or by court order. That's basic property law, Deputy." Moss's jaw tightened. He did not appreciate being educated. He especially did not appreciate being educated by a woman he had been called to remove because the education implied that his authority was conditional. And conditional authority was, to Garland Moss, an intolerable concept. "Step over here, please." "Am I being detained?" "I'm conducting an investigation." "Into what?" "I've committed no crime. I'm a registered guest sitting on a public bench." The posted sign, right there, confirms this is a guest-accessible area. "I've provided identification. I've explained my legal status. What crime are you investigating?" Moss did not answer the question. Instead, he took her elbow, gripped it, pulled it, turned her body, and walked her 3 steps toward his patrol car. The movement was not violent. It was worse than violent. It was procedural. It had the practiced smoothness of a maneuver performed so many times that the person performing it no longer recognized it as force. She pulled her elbow free. "Deputy, I have not consented to being moved. I am not resisting. I am asking, on the record, whether I am being detained or whether I am free to go." A voice cut through the exchange before Moss could answer. It came from the direction of the pool terrace, calm, bored, carrying the particular flatness of a man who had never needed to raise his voice because the world raised itself to meet him. "Just get her out. I didn't pay $200,000 for this weekend to look at this." Corbin Whitfield stood on the terrace steps 30 feet away, in a linen shirt and tailored shorts and leather sandals that cost more than the monthly salary of the deputy standing in front of Joelle. His arms were crossed. His expression was the expression of a man watching an employee handle a pest control issue. Interested enough to observe, not interested enough to participate. Confident enough to believe that his command would be executed because his commands were always executed. Moss straightened. The presence of money did something to his posture, not quite a salute but a recalibration. A reminder of who called in the complaint and who signed the checks that kept the resort's security contract active, and who, by extension, contributed to the county sheriff's discretionary fund through the annual Resort Association contribution. "We're handling it, Mr. Whitfield." Corbin stepped down from the terrace, closer now, close enough for Joelle to see the Patek Philippe on his wrist, the kind of watch that announces its price through its refusal to announce anything at all. Close enough for him to see her face, the face of a woman he did not recognize, had never met, and had already categorized with the speed and efficiency of a man who sorted human beings the way his algorithms sorted data. I said, "Get her out." He did not look at Joelle when he said it. He looked at Moss. The words passed over her head, literally and figuratively, as though she were not a person but an obstacle, a piece of the landscape that needed rearranging. A man in a dark suit, thick-necked, earpiece, the physical vocabulary of private security, appeared behind Corbin. Not Colt. Someone from Corbin's personal detail. He positioned himself between Corbin and Joelle with the practiced geometry of a body trained to absorb threats, even when the only threat in the vicinity was a woman in linen pants holding a novel. The bodyguard stepped forward and placed his hand flat against Joelle's sternum. Not a push. A stop. 5 fingers, open palm, pressed against her chest with enough pressure to prevent forward movement. The contact was intimate in its violence, the kind of touch that reduces a human body to a barrier that needs management. "Step back, ma'am." Joelle looked down at the hand on her chest. She looked at the bodyguard. She looked at the security camera on the promenade railing, the same one she had pointed out to Colt 40 minutes earlier. "Remove your hand from my body. Now." The bodyguard did not remove his hand. Corbin watched from 5 feet away, arms still crossed, the posture of a man observing a transaction he had paid for. "Deputy," Joelle said, turning to Moss. Her voice was steady, but the effort required to keep it steady was visible in the tendons of her neck. "A private citizen has just placed his hand on my chest without my consent. Under South Carolina law, that constitutes assault and battery. Are you going to arrest him, or are you going to arrest me?" Moss looked at the bodyguard, looked at Corbin, looked at Joelle. The calculation was fast, automatic, and arrived at the conclusion that the architecture of the situation had predetermined. "Turn around. Hands on the vehicle." "Under what authority?" "Trespassing. South Carolina, Code 16-11-600. That statute requires notice and an opportunity to leave. I was never served written notice from the property owner. I was never given a reasonable opportunity to depart, and the posted signage, which I've documented with photographs, explicitly grants registered guests access to this area." Moss pushed her against the patrol car, both hands on her shoulders. Not a slam, but a shove, a compression, the kind of contact that forces compliance through body mechanics rather than explicit violence. Her palms flattened against the warm metal of the hood. The sun had heated the surface to the point where contact stung. Not enough to burn, enough to communicate that comfort was no longer a variable in this equation. "Hands behind your back. I want to state clearly that I am not resisting and that I do not consent to this detention." Moss pulled her wrists behind her and snapped the handcuffs closed. The metal bit into her skin, the left cuff tighter than the right, the pressure immediate and specific, the kind of discomfort that is not accidental because accidental discomfort would distribute evenly. "Too tight," she said. He did not adjust them. From the promenade, Colt Ramsey watched with his arms crossed and a satisfaction he did not bother to conceal. Behind him, Deirdre Ashton had emerged from the pool area to observe, her phone held at an angle that was not quite recording and not quite not recording, the posture of a woman who wanted documentation of the spectacle but did not want to be documented, documenting it. Moss loaded Joelle into the back of the cruiser. The door closed. The air conditioning was off. The back seat smelled of sweat and disinfectant, and the accumulated residue of every person who had occupied that seat before her, the guilty, the innocent, the ones whose only crime was existing in a space someone else had decided they did not deserve. Through the window, she watched Colt shake Moss's hand. She watched Tessa Platt appear at the resort entrance, speaking into her phone with the brisk efficiency of someone reporting a problem solved. She watched Deirdre Ashton return to the pool deck, her conscience unburdened by the comfortable fiction that what had just happened was law enforcement rather than enforcement of a different kind. The cruiser pulled away from the resort at 4:31 p.m. Joelle sat in the back seat with her hands cuffed behind her and her spine straight and her breathing controlled and her mind already composing the document she would write when her hands were free, the document that would record every timestamp, every name, every badge number, every word spoken, and every word withheld. She had been trained to compose documents in her head before writing them. She had been doing it for 23 years. In courtrooms where the evidence was complex and the stakes were high and the truth was buried under layers of procedure and plausible deniability. In chambers where the law was a living thing that required interpretation, application, and, when the system failed, correction. She was not a lawyer. She was not an activist. She was not a public defender or a journalist or any of the roles that Colt Ramsey and Tessa Platt and Deputy Garland Moss had silently assigned her in the process of deciding she did not belong. She was something else entirely. And in 19 days, every person who had touched her, moved her, denied her, cuffed her, and driven her away from the space she had paid to occupy would discover exactly what. The Beaufort County Sheriff's substation was a single-story cinder block building on a 2-lane road 13 miles from the resort, set back from the pavement behind a parking lot that held 6 cruisers and a civilian sedan with a cracked windshield. The flag out front was faded. The air conditioning unit on the roof rattled. The building communicated efficiency without investment, the architectural equivalent of a department that processed people without examining what it was processing. Moss brought her through the rear entrance. Booking desk. A sergeant named Hewitt, broad-shouldered, gray-mustached, the kind of man who had been sitting behind that desk long enough to have seen every version of every story and no longer expected any of them to surprise him. Trespassing, Moss said. Resort complaint. Hewitt pulled a form from the stack to his left and began filling it in without looking up. Name, date of birth, address. The machinery of processing. Impersonal, methodical, indifferent to the question of whether the person being processed had done anything wrong. I'd like the complaint number and the name of the complainant, Joelle said. Moss answered without turning around. That's not how this works. Actually, it is. South Carolina Freedom of Information Act entitles the subject of a criminal complaint to the basic incident information, including the reporting party. Hewitt's pen paused. He glanced at Moss. Moss did not meet his eyes. The complaint was filed by Palmetto Shores Resort Security, Colt Ramsey. Joelle filed the name, filed the structure. A private security officer, employed by a resort, operating on a complaint generated by a billionaire's entourage, enforced by a county deputy. The chain was clean. The chain was also exactly the kind of public-private cooperation that federal courts had identified, in case after case, as the mechanism through which constitutional rights were circumvented by outsourcing enforcement to private actors who were not bound by the same constraints as state agents, until a state agent acted on their behalf, at which point the entire chain became state action under the 14th Amendment. She did not say any of this. She stored it. Fingerprinting came first. Hewitt pressed her fingers into the ink pad with more pressure than necessary. Not cruelty, but not care either. The kind of handling that exists in the gap between procedure and consideration, where the person on the receiving end has been reduced to a task rather than a human being. Photographs next, front, left profile, right profile. The camera flash was harsh. The placard she held, Beaufort County Sheriff / Mabry, Joelle, A/March 29, 2025, was slightly warped at one corner, a cosmetic defect that no one had bothered to fix because the people who held it were not the people who made decisions about facility maintenance. I'm entitled to a phone call, she said. Hewitt looked at her over his glasses. When we're done processing. South Carolina Code Section 17-13-40 provides for communication with counsel or family within a reasonable time after booking. Hewitt set down his pen. The citation was accurate. He knew it was accurate because he had been in this building long enough to know the difference between detainees who knew their rights and detainees who did not, and this woman was in the first category with a fluency that made him slightly uncomfortable. You'll get your call. Property inventory came next. Moss emptied her bag onto the counter. The phone, the rental car key, the reading glasses, a wallet containing $43 in cash, and 2 credit cards, the bottle of water, the sunscreen, and the notebook. The leather notebook landed on the counter with a soft thud. Moss picked it up, turned it over, opened it to a random page. His eyes scanned the handwriting, precise, dated, structured in the format of a log rather than a diary. He frowned but said nothing. He placed it with the other items, and Hewitt sealed them in a clear plastic property bag and tagged it with the booking number. "Cell 3, Hewitt said. Cell 3 was 8 feet by 6. A metal bench bolted to the wall, a toilet without a seat, a fluorescent light that buzzed at a frequency designed to prevent sleep. The door closed behind her with the heavy mechanical finality of a system that does not distinguish between the guilty and the inconvenient. She sat on the bench, hands free now, the cuffs removed during booking. She rubbed her left wrist where the metal had pressed a groove into her skin. The mark was already darkening. It would bruise by morning. Through the wall, she could hear the dispatch radio cycling through calls. Static, voices, case numbers. At 5:22 p.m., Hewitt answered a call that made her listen more carefully. He was reading something back to a dispatcher, a 911 call log. "Confirm. Call ID Bravo Charlie 7941. Received 1541 hours. Caller, Colt Ramsey, Head of Security, Palmetto Shores Resort. Duration, 3 minutes, 12 seconds. Complaint, unauthorized individual, described as black female, 40s, refusing to vacate promenade area. Caller states individual has been asked to leave multiple times by resort staff and private security. Caller requests law enforcement assistance for trespassing removal." The words drifted through the cinder block wall with the clinical clarity of institutional documentation. Black female, 40s. Not a guest. Not a woman. Not a person with a name and a reservation and a right to be where she was. A description, reduced to demographics and defiance, stripped of context, calibrated to produce exactly the response it had produced. Joelle listened. She committed the call ID to memory. Bravo Charlie, 7941, 1541 hours. 3 minutes, 12 seconds. The numbers would appear in the document she was composing, alongside every other number, badge numbers, camera timestamps, booking codes, that would transform this experience from a personal ordeal into an evidentiary record. At 5:47 p.m., the cell block door opened. Not Hewitt this time. A different officer, younger, female, name tag reading Corporal Tate. She carried a tray. "Dinner," Tate said. She slid the tray through the slot at the bottom of the door. A ham sandwich on white bread wrapped in plastic, an apple, a small carton of milk. Joelle looked at the tray, then at Tate. "How long am I being held?" "Magistrates available Monday morning for bond hearing, unless someone posts bail tonight." "The charge is misdemeanor trespassing. Bond should be set at booking per standard county schedule." Tate hesitated. She knew Joelle was right. Misdemeanor trespassing carried a standard bond of $500 in Beaufort County. Processable at booking, no magistrate required. The fact that bond had not been offered was not an oversight. It was a choice made by Moss or Hewitt or both, designed to extend detention past the point of inconvenience and into the territory of punishment. "I'll check with the sergeant," Tate said. "Please do. And please inform the sergeant that holding a detainee on a misdemeanor charge without offering standard bond violates the Beaufort County Pretrial Release Guidelines, Section 4, Paragraph B." Tate left. The sandwich remained untouched. Not because Joelle wasn't hungry, because eating required accepting the terms of the confinement, and she was not yet prepared to accept terms she intended to challenge. At 6:08 p.m., Hewitt appeared at the cell door. "Bond's been set, $500. You can pay by credit card at the desk or have someone bring cash. I'd like my phone call now." Hewitt nodded. The nod was different than it would have been an hour ago, slower, more careful, as if he had become aware that the woman in cell 3 was measuring every interaction with a precision that made carelessness dangerous. She closed her eyes and began composing. March 29th, 4:31 p.m. Arrested by Deputy Garland Moss. Badge 4217. Beaufort County Sheriff's Office. Charge, trespassing, SC Code, Section 16-11-600. No written notice from property owner served prior to arrest. No opportunity to vacate provided. Physical contact during arrest. Hands on shoulders. Compression against vehicle hood. Elbow grip and redirect without consent. Handcuffs applied with excessive tightness on left wrist. Transport. Rear of cruiser, unit number 4, 217B, departed resort 4:31 p.m., arrived substation 4:48 p.m. Booking. Sergeant Hewitt, substation desk. Property inventoried and sealed. Fingerprints and photographs taken. Phone call not yet provided as of booking completion. Cell 3. The document was 400 words long by the time she opened her eyes. Every word was stored in a memory trained by 23 years of reading briefs, opinions, and trial transcripts with the attention to detail that transforms information into evidence. At 6:12 p.m., 1 hour and 41 minutes after booking, Hewitt brought her to the phone. She dialed a number from memory. It rang twice. "It's me," she said. Her voice was calm, controlled, the voice of a woman who understood that the person on the other end of the line needed information, not emotion. "I've been arrested. Trespassing charge. Beaufort County Substation, Highway 174. I'm fine. I'll need the file on my desk. The one marked Whitfield." Silence on the other end. Then a voice, male, measured, the kind of voice that processes bad news by calculating consequences rather than expressing outrage. "When?" "This afternoon, 4:31. Are you hurt?" "Bruised wrist from the cuffs. Nothing requiring medical attention." "I'll make calls." "Not yet. Not until I'm processed out. I need to know how far they're willing to take this." Another silence. Longer this time. The kind of silence that occurs when the person listening understands not just what has been said, but what has been decided, and disagrees with the decision, but respects the authority of the person making it. "Be careful." "I always am." She hung up. Hewitt walked her back to the cell. She sat on the bench and waited. Not passively, not with resignation, with the focused patience of someone who understood that the system processing her was, at this moment, generating the very evidence that the system would eventually be required to answer for. At the booking desk, Hewitt returned to his paperwork. But something nagged at him. A discomfort he could not articulate. A feeling that the arrest he had just processed was not the routine trespass call Moss had described. The woman's composure, her precision, the way she cited statutes, the way other people cited phone numbers, from memory, accurately, without hesitation. He pulled up her information on the booking terminal. Joelle A. Mabry, Columbia, South Carolina. No prior record, no warrants. Clean. He stared at the screen for a moment. Then, for reasons he would not fully understand until 19 days later, he opened a browser on his personal phone and typed her name into the search bar. The results loaded in 2 seconds. The first 3 were from official government directories. The fourth was a news article from the Charleston Post and Courier, dated 7 months earlier. Hewitt read the headline. His face changed. Not dramatically, he was too seasoned for dramatic facial shifts, but in the subtle, involuntary way that faces change when the brain behind them encounters information that reclassifies everything that came before it. He turned the phone face down on the desk. He looked at the cell block door, then at Moss, who was filling out the incident report at a desk in the corner, writing with the self-satisfied unhurriedness of a man who believed the paperwork was a formality rather than a confession. Then at the property bag on the shelf behind him, the clear plastic bag containing a phone, a wallet, a pair of reading glasses, and a leather notebook whose contents would, in the coming weeks, be requested by attorneys from 3 different jurisdictions. Hewitt picked up the desk phone and dialed a number. Not the sheriff's personal line, not dispatch, a different number. One he had used only twice before in 23 years, both times when the department had stepped into a situation that was about to become something much larger than the incident report suggested. The phone rang 4 times before someone answered. U.S. Marshal Service, District of South Carolina. How can I direct your call? The truth about who she really is will change everything. Subscribe now so you're here when it all comes crashing down. Hewitt cleared his throat, looked at the cell block door one more time. I need to speak with the duty marshal. We have a situation in Beaufort County that requires your immediate attention. He paused. It involves one of your protectees. In cell 3, Joelle Mabry sat on the metal bench with her back against the cinder block wall, and her bruised wrist resting on her knee and her eyes closed. She was not sleeping. She was composing. The document in her mind had grown to 600 words. 600 words of dates and times and names and badge numbers that would, in 19 days, be read into the official record of a proceeding that none of the men who arrested her knew was coming. Through the walls, she could hear Moss's pen scratching on the incident report. She could hear Hewitt's voice, low and urgent, on the telephone. She could hear the air conditioning rattle, and the fluorescent light buzz, and the particular quality of institutional silence that exists in buildings where people are held against their will. She did not know what Hewitt had found. She did not know he had searched her name. She did not know he was, at that moment, placing a call that would set in motion a chain of events that neither Colt Ramsey, nor Tessa Platt, nor Everett Dane, nor Deputy Garland Moss, nor Corbin Whitfield himself had the power to stop. But she knew something they did not. She knew who she was. She knew what was coming. And she knew, with the certainty of a woman who had spent 23 years sitting in the one chair in every courtroom that no one argues with, that the system that had processed her tonight would very soon be required to process itself. The fluorescent light buzzed, the air conditioner rattled, the pen scratched, and somewhere in the file on her desk in Columbia, the one marked Whitfield, a case number waited. Whitfield Group L, LC, et al. Versus Community Housing Alliance of Charleston et al. Civil Action Number 2, :24-CV-03891-JAM. A case about discriminatory housing practices, about tenants denied leases because of the color of their skin, about a pattern of conduct that stretched across 14 properties in 3 counties and had generated 412 pages of depositions and 71 exhibits, and a trial date set for April 17th. April 17th. 19 days away. And the judge assigned to preside over it, the judge whose name appeared on every scheduling order, every discovery ruling, every pretrial conference minute, was sitting in cell 3 of the Beaufort County Sheriff's substation with a bruised wrist and a memory full of evidence and a patience that was, for the first time in 23 years, beginning to thin. The phone on Hewitt's desk rang. He answered it. Listened. His face, already pale, went one shade paler. He hung up and walked to the cell block, stood outside the door of cell 3 for a moment, collecting himself the way a man collects himself before entering a room where the power dynamics have just been permanently reversed. Then he opened the door. "Ms. Mabry," he said. His voice had changed. The administrative flatness was gone. In its place was something Joelle recognized immediately, not because it was new, but because she heard it every morning at 9 a.m. when the bailiff opened the door to her courtroom and every person in the gallery rose to their feet. It was deference. "Ma'am, I need to make some calls. Please, sit tight. I'll be back." He closed the door. Gently this time. Not the mechanical slam of a system processing a task. The careful, quiet click of a man who had just realized that the task had been processing him. In the hallway, he stopped Moss mid-sentence. "Stop writing," he said. "I'm almost done with the—" "Stop writing." Moss looked at him. Hewitt's face told a story that no incident report would ever capture, a story about the distance between what they had done and what they were about to discover, a distance that was shrinking with every second and would collapse entirely within the hour. "What's going on?" Moss asked. Hewitt did not answer. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and stared at the phone that was about to ring again. It did. 3 minutes later. A different voice this time, sharper, higher in the chain, carrying the particular urgency of a person whose job is to prevent exactly the kind of catastrophe that was now unfolding in a cinder block building on a 2-lane road in Beaufort County, South Carolina. Moss stood in the doorway, pen still in hand, watching Hewitt's face for clues. He would not get them. Not yet. Not until the black sedan with federal plates pulled into the parking lot at 7:48 p.m., and a man in a dark suit stepped out with credentials that made the sheriff's badge on the wall behind Hewitt's desk feel suddenly, irreversibly small. But that was still an hour away. For now, in cell 3, Joelle Mabry composed. And the evidence grew, and the clock ticked. 19 days. Outside, the March night settled over the lowcountry with the dense warmth of a season turning. At Palmetto Shores Resort, 47 miles up the coast, Corbin Whitfield stood on the terrace of the presidential suite and looked out at an ocean that reflected nothing back to him. Beside him, Everett Dane reviewed the weekend's agenda on a tablet, scrolling through presentations and speaker notes and catering orders with the efficiency of a man whose job was to ensure that his client's world remained frictionless. "The trespassing situation has been handled," Everett said. "Local sheriff removed her this afternoon. She's being held overnight." "Good." Corbin did not turn from the window. "Make sure the resort files a formal complaint. I don't want her showing up again." "Already in process." "And find out who she is. Someone booked a suite at my resort during my event without being affiliated with the group. I want to know who she is and why she was here." Everett made a note on his tablet. A simple task, a name search, a background check. The kind of routine due diligence that Corbin's team performed on anyone who entered his orbit without invitation. He would run the search in the morning, and when the results came back, when the name Joelle A. Mabry resolved into the person behind it, he would understand, with the nauseating clarity of hindsight, that the woman his client had ordered removed from a resort was the woman who held the future of his client's company in her hands. But that was tomorrow. Tonight, in Cell 3, Joelle composed, and the document grew, and the evidence multiplied, and somewhere in a leather notebook sealed in a plastic property bag on a shelf behind a desk sergeant's chair, a notebook that no one in that building understood the significance of yet, 27 blank pages waited to be filled. They would be, every one of them, and every word would count. The video was 11 seconds long. 11 seconds! That was all it took for a phone camera held at hip level by a 23-year-old resort housekeeper named Deja Parsons to capture the moment Bryce Kendall seized Naomi Calloway's wrist, and the moment, 1.4 seconds later, when Naomi rotated her hand inward, pressed 2 fingers against the tendon gap below his thumb, and freed herself without raising her voice or shifting her weight more than 6 inches in any direction. Bryce stumbled back. Naomi stood still. Her breathing did not change. Deja's phone kept recording for another 3 seconds, long enough to catch Bryce's face cycling through surprise, humiliation, and something uglier, before she pocketed the device and disappeared through the service corridor behind the pool house. She did not post the video. She did not show it to anyone. She saved it to her cloud backup, locked the phone, and finished folding towels for the rest of her shift. The video sat in a folder labeled personal for 9 days before it mattered, before it became the thing that cracked the wall open. But that comes later. So, 3 days after the incident on the terrace, the one Bryce would later describe in his internal report as a guest who became verbally aggressive and had to be physically redirected, Naomi Calloway checked out of the Palmetto Shores Resort at 6:47 in the morning. She paid the bill in full, including 2 charges she had not authorized: a $50 resort amenity surcharge that did not appear in the booking confirmation email, and a $22 late checkout cleaning fee, despite leaving before the standard 11 a.m. window. She paid both. She photographed the receipt. She photographed the folio. She photographed the itemized breakdown on the screen that the front desk clerk, not Tessa, a different clerk, younger, apologetic without understanding why, turned toward her when she asked to see it. She asked one question before she left. "Is there a guest comment form?" Paper, not digital. The clerk handed her one. Naomi filled it out in the lobby. Block letters, neat margins. She wrote 4 sentences. She signed it. She folded it into thirds, placed it in the envelope provided, and left it on the counter. She did not hand it to the clerk. She did not ask for a copy. She left it where cameras could see her placing it. The comment card was collected during the morning desk turnover at 8:15 a.m. It was logged in the resort's guest feedback system at 8:22 a.m. by front desk supervisor Tessa Holbrook, the same Tessa Holbrook who had told Naomi 4 days earlier that there is no reservation under that name. The card was not in the system the following morning. It was not in the system the morning after that. When Deja Parsons, the housekeeper, asked the front desk whether any guest complaints had been filed about the terrace incident, Tessa told her no complaints were on file. Naomi Calloway drove north on Highway 17, past the salt marshes and the shrimp docks, and the Gullah sweetgrass baskets sold from roadside stands that tourists slowed down to photograph but rarely bought. Her phone sat in the center console. She did not make any calls for the first 40 minutes of the drive. At 7:31 a.m., she dialed a number saved under the name Chambers, Direct. The call lasted 6 minutes. The content of that call would not be known for another 3 weeks. What happened next did not happen quickly. That is the first thing to understand about what followed. It did not happen the way it happens in stories, where evidence appears overnight and the guilty are exposed by sunrise. What happened took 22 days of paperwork, phone calls, referrals, counter-referrals, voicemail systems that answered with recorded messages about anticipated response times of 5 to 7 business days, and 2 certified letters that were signed for but never acknowledged. This is how the system works. Not with speed, with weight, with the particular heaviness of bureaucracy applied to people who have already been made to feel that their time does not matter. Naomi filed a formal complaint with the South Carolina Human Rights Commission on Tuesday, June 4th, 6 days after checkout. The complaint referenced Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, codified at 42 U.S.C. Section 2000A, which prohibits discrimination in places of public accommodation on the basis of race. The form required 12 fields of information. She filled in all 12. She attached the booking confirmation email, sent March 14th, confirmation number PLS-88471, Ocean View Suite, 3 nights, prepaid in full. She attached the folio showing the unauthorized charges. She attached a written narrative of each incident. The side door escort on day 1, Margot Delaney's question about whether she was the new spa hire, Tessa Holbrook's statement that no reservation existed, the dinner removal from the outdoor table, the fake cease and desist letter, and the physical contact on the terrace. She did not attach the comment card. She noted on page 4 of her narrative that a comment card had been submitted and was no longer in the resort's system. She did not mention her profession. The form asked for occupation. She wrote, legal professional. If you think this is just about one resort and one woman, you haven't been paying attention. Subscribe now. What's coming next is something none of them saw coming. The receipts arrived in pieces. That is the second thing to understand. Not in a flood. In a drip. Slow enough to be ignored individually, damning enough in aggregate to become a pattern. Receipt 1. The booking confirmation email. Sent March 14th at 2:17 p.m. from reservations at palmettoshoresresort.com to n.callaway at the email domain she used for personal travel. Subject line. Confirmation. Your stay at Palmetto Shores Resort. Body text included reservation number PLS-88471, room type Ocean View Suite, 314, check-in date, May 29th, checkout, June 1st. Prepaid amount, $1,412. Credit card ending 8803. This was the document Naomi had read aloud on her first morning at the resort, standing at the front desk, phone screen angled toward Tessa Holbrook, who had looked at the screen for exactly 2 seconds before saying, and this is what she said, word for word, according to Naomi's written narrative and the lobby security camera footage that would later be subpoenaed. I'm sorry, ma'am. There's no reservation under that name in our system. Perhaps you booked through a third-party site? Those sometimes don't sync. The reservation was not booked through a third-party site. It was booked through the resort's own website. The confirmation email came from the resort's own domain. The payment was processed through the resort's own merchant account. The reservation existed. It had simply been, and this word would appear 17 times in the subsequent investigation, reassigned. Receipt 2. The internal email. This one took longer to surface. It came through a public records request filed not by Naomi, but by a Charleston-based journalist named Warren Osei, who covered hospitality industry labor disputes and had received, 3 weeks after Naomi's checkout, an anonymous tip, a single sentence, no attachment, from a Proton mail address that was never traced. Ask Palmetto Shores about Suite 314 on May 29th. Osei filed a FOIA request with the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office for any incident reports, dispatch logs, or officer communications referencing the Palmetto Shores Resort between May 28th and June 2nd. The request was fulfilled in 19 days. Among the documents returned was a copy of an email forwarded by Deputy Frank Moss to his watch commander as part of his incident documentation. The email was not written by Moss. It was written by Tessa Holbrook, sent to Bryce Kendall at 10:14 a.m. on May 29th, 37 minutes before Naomi's arrival. The email read, t.holbrook@palmettoshoresresort.com to b.kendall@palmettoshoresresort.com. Date, May 29th, 10:14 a.m. Subject line, Suite 314 heads up. Bryce. The guest checking into 314 today is not one of the Whitfield referrals. Mr. Whitfield's assistant called this morning and asked us to move her to a garden view room on the second floor. I told her the suite was prepaid and the guest hadn't requested a change. She said Mr. Whitfield would prefer it. I reassigned the room. Use the side entrance for check-in. Don't make it a scene, just redirect her. If she pushes back, call me. The email was sent 37 minutes before Naomi walked through the front door and was guided, by Bryce, to the side entrance instead. Mr. Whitfield. Corbin Whitfield, owner and managing director of the Whitfield Hospitality Group, parent company of Palmetto Shores Resort, operator of 11 properties across 4 southeastern states, and resident of the 6,200 square foot penthouse occupying the resort's top floor, which he used approximately 40 days per year and which was, during the remaining 325 days, maintained by a staff of 3 at an annual cost, his accountant listed as a business expense. Corbin Whitfield had never met Naomi Calloway, had never spoken to her, had never, by his own later statement, been aware of her reservation until his assistant flagged it during a routine review of the week's guest list. The assistant, whose name would later be redacted in the investigation, had flagged the reservation because, and this is how Whitfield's attorney would phrase it, the guest profile did not match the resort's typical clientele demographic, and Mr. Whitfield's standing preference was to be informed of any bookings that deviated from the established guest profile. The established guest profile. That phrase would carry weight later. Considerable weight. Receipt 3. The 911 call log. i.e., dispatch log, Beaufort County 911 Center. Call received June 1st, 3:47 p.m. Caller identification. Bryce Kendall, listed as security coordinator, Palmetto Shores Resort. Dispatcher. Lorraine, call sign Delta 9. Duration, 4 minutes, 11 seconds. Partial transcript obtained through FOIA. Beaufort County 911, what is your emergency? This is Bryce Kendall at Palmetto Shores Resort. Caller ID should show our property line. We have a situation with a guest, former guest, who has been asked to leave the property and is refusing. She's becoming agitated. Is the individual threatening anyone or displaying a weapon? No weapons. But she grabbed my arm when I tried to escort her, and she's been confrontational. Trespassing at this point. Has she been formally notified that she's no longer welcome on the property? Yes, ma'am, multiple times. Any injuries? She twisted my wrist. Self-defense, she called it. The call continued for another 2 minutes. Bryce provided Naomi's description. The dispatcher assigned Deputy Frank Moss, badge 2214, who arrived at the resort at 4:03 p.m., 16 minutes after the call. What the 911 transcript did not contain, because Bryce did not mention it, was that the formal notification to leave had come not from resort management through any written or posted notice, but from Bryce himself, verbally, on the terrace, while his hand was already on her wrist. South Carolina. Code Section 16-11-620, Criminal Trespass, requires, for a trespass prosecution, that the accused person have received clear notice, either through posted signage or written notification from the property owner or authorized agent, and have refused to leave after receiving that notice. No written notice was issued. No trespass warning form was completed. And the video, Deja Parsons' 11-second clip, showed that Naomi was moving toward the exit, not away from it, at the moment Bryce seized her wrist. She was leaving. He stopped her from leaving. Then he called 911 to report that she was refusing to leave. The contradiction would not become apparent for another 12 days. Receipt 3.5, if such a thing exists, was the cease and desist letter itself. The document had been delivered to Naomi's room at 2:15 p.m. on June 1st, slipped under the door in a resort-branded envelope. It was printed on letterhead that read, Office of Legal Affairs, Whitfield Hospitality Group, a department that, according to public corporate filings, did not exist as a standalone office. Legal services for Whitfield Hospitality Group were provided by Langford Nash & Pryor, an outside firm. The Office of Legal Affairs was a fiction typed onto paper to give institutional weight to a document that had none. Naomi had read the letter standing in her room, barefoot, the ocean visible through the window behind her. She read it twice. The first time to understand what it said. The second time to catalog what it lacked. What it said. You are hereby notified that your continued presence on Palmetto Shores Resort property constitutes unauthorized occupation of private premises. You are directed to vacate the property within 2 hours of receipt of this notice. Failure to comply may result in legal action. What it lacked: a case number, a court filing reference, a notarized signature, a bar number identifying the attorney who drafted it, and, most critically, any citation to a specific legal authority under which the demand was made. It was, in every functional sense, a letter-shaped threat with no legal engine behind it. Naomi photographed both sides of the letter. She photographed the envelope. She noted the time of delivery. Then she folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in her suitcase next to the booking confirmation and the folio. She did not comply with the 2-hour deadline. She went to the pool instead. Receipt 4. Deputy Moss's Incident Report. Beaufort County Sheriff's Office. Incident Report Number 2. 024-BC-04471. Responding Officer, Deputy Frank Moss, Badge 2214. Date, June 1st. Arrival time listed, 4:03 p.m. Departure time, 4:38 p.m. Deputy Moss's report described the encounter in neutral, procedural language. He wrote that the complainant, Bryce Kendall, stated the subject had been asked to vacate the premises and had refused. He wrote that the subject, identified as Naomi Calloway, was calm and cooperative upon my arrival. He wrote that he advised the subject of the trespass complaint and recommended she depart voluntarily to avoid further escalation. He did not write that Naomi had asked him, standing on the terrace with the ocean behind her and the salt wind pulling at her collar, a single question. Deputy, I'd like to see the posted trespass notice or the written notification. South Carolina Code Section 16-11-620 requires one or the other before a criminal trespass charge can proceed. Moss looked at Bryce. Bryce looked at Tessa, who had come outside to observe. No one produced a sign. No one produced a document, because no sign existed and no document had been prepared. Moss's report did not mention this exchange. It noted only that the subject agreed to depart the premises without incident. What the report also did not mention, and what Osei's FOIA request would reveal 11 days later, was that Moss had a prior professional relationship with the Palmetto Shores Resort. He had worked off-duty security at resort events on 3 occasions in the preceding 12 months, paid through the resort's private security contractor at a rate of $55 per hour. This arrangement was not disclosed in the incident report. It was not disclosed to Naomi. It was discovered in a billing invoice attached to the resort's vendor payment records, which the county's finance office released as part of a broader public records request about off-duty law enforcement employment. $55 per hour, 3 events, a total of 16.5 billable hours. $907.50, paid by a company owned by Corbin Whitfield to a deputy who then responded to that company's 911 call and wrote a report that omitted the single legal fact, the absence of a trespass notice, that would have invalidated the complaint. Moss did not arrest Naomi. He did not threaten arrest. But he did say something, standing by his cruiser as she walked to her car, that she wrote down 30 seconds later in the notebook she kept in the center console. She wrote it in block letters, capital, with the time, 4:34 p.m., and his badge number, 2214. What he said was this: "Ma'am, a little advice. Some places just aren't worth the trouble. You understand what I'm saying?" She understood. She wrote it down. She drove away. Ugh. A hint number 4 arrived the way the important ones always do, without announcement, without explanation, from a direction no one was watching. It happened on May 30th, the second morning of Naomi's stay, before the terrace incident, before the 911 call, before any of the machinery of complaint and counter-complaint had begun turning. She was walking through the garden courtyard between the main building and the spa pavilion. Early, 6:40 a.m. The landscaping crew was already at work, 2 men in khaki uniforms trimming hedges, a woman raking the white gravel paths into the patterns that resort guests expected without knowing they expected them. A man emerged from the service entrance near the laundry wing, older, mid-60s, hair gone silver at the temples, wearing the resort's maintenance uniform with the Palmetto Shores crest on the breast pocket. He carried a clipboard in one hand and a ring of keys in the other. He had worked at the resort for 22 years. His name was Virgil. He saw Naomi. He stopped. The pause lasted 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough to be noticeable, long enough for something to cross his face. Recognition, or something adjacent to recognition. The kind of expression a person wears when they realize they know someone but haven't yet decided whether to say so. Then he set his clipboard under his arm, stood slightly straighter, and inclined his head. Not a bow, not a nod. Something between the two, something that carried the weight of formality and respect in a single deliberate motion. Virgil. Ms. Calloway, good morning. Would you like me to have someone bring coffee to your room? The kitchen is already open for staff service. He did not say how he knew her name. He did not explain the formality. He did not look around to see if anyone was watching, which suggested he did not care if anyone was watching. Naomi studied his face for a moment. Her expression did not change. She said, "Thank you, Virgil. That would be kind." She knew his name, too. Neither of them explained. Margot Delaney, walking past the courtyard on her way to the spa entrance, saw the exchange. She saw the inclination of Virgil's head. She saw the stillness, the particular quality of stillness that happens when 2 people are communicating more than their words contain. Margot did not ask about it, but she watched Naomi differently after that. Not with the same dismissal as before. Something more cautious. Something that felt, for the first time, like uncertainty. 22 days after Naomi Calloway checked out of the Palmetto Shores resort, the pieces began to converge. The South Carolina Human Rights Commission had acknowledged her complaint and assigned it a docket number. Warren Osai's FOIA returns had produced the email between Tessa and Bryce, the 911 call log, and the billing invoice connecting Moss to the resort. The comment card had not been located. But none of those pieces, individually or collectively, were what changed the landscape. What changed the landscape was the calendar. Specifically, the United States District Court for the District of South Carolina, Charleston Division, Civil Action, number 2:23-CV-04891, styled Beaufort County, NAACP et al., versus Whitfield Hospitality Group, LLC et al. The case had been filed 14 months earlier. It alleged violations of the Fair Housing Act, 42 U.S.C., Section 3, 1604, claiming that Whitfield Hospitality Group had engaged in a pattern of discriminatory practices across 3 of its 11 properties, including Palmetto Shores Resort. The practices described in the complaint included steering black guests to lower-tier rooms despite booking premium accommodations, imposing surcharges not applied to white guests, and employing security staff who disproportionately surveilled and confronted guests of color. The case had survived a motion to dismiss. It had survived discovery disputes. It had been assigned to a judge. Corbin Whitfield's lead attorney was a man named Everett Nash, 61 years old, senior partner at Langford Nash and Pryor, a Charleston firm that specialized in hospitality defense, commercial litigation, and, when the occasion arose, making problems disappear through procedural attrition. Nash had successfully delayed the trial date twice through motions for additional discovery and a claim that a key witness had relocated out of state. The third trial date was set for June 24th, 23 days after Naomi Calloway checked out of the resort that was named in the lawsuit. The case was assigned to the Honorable Naomi R. Calloway, United States District Judge, District of South Carolina. If you think you know where this is going, you're right. But you don't know how it gets there. Stay with me. Niotz, June 24th, 9 a.m., the J. Waddy's Waring Judicial Center, 83 Meeting Street, Charleston, South Carolina, named after the federal judge who desegregated South Carolina's schools in 1951 and was burned in effigy for doing so. A building that understood, in its bones and its nameplate, what it meant for law to collide with power. Courtroom 3, federal, high ceilings, mahogany paneling, the seal of the United States District Court mounted behind the bench in bronze and blue. The gallery was half full. Attorneys, paralegals, 3 reporters from the Post and Courier, a representative from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, and 16 spectators, whose interest ranged from professional to personal, to the simple human curiosity that draws people to courtrooms the way it draws them to weather. Corbin Whitfield arrived at 8:47 a.m. gray suit, French cuffs, leather shoes polished to a depth that suggested someone else had done the polishing. He walked through security with the practiced ease of a man accustomed to moving through institutional spaces without being questioned. Everett Nash walked beside him, briefcase in one hand, trial binder in the other. They took their seats at the defense table. Nash arranged his documents. Whitfield adjusted his cuffs. They did not speak. The confidence between them was the kind that comes from long acquaintance and shared assumption. We will prevail because we always prevail, because the architecture of the system was built by people who look like us. At the plaintiff's table, attorneys Denise Okafor and James Tolbert reviewed their exhibits. Okafor was 53, Howard Law, 26 years of civil rights litigation. Tolbert was 31, her second chair, meticulous with evidence binders. Behind them, 3 community representatives from the Beaufort County NAACP sat with the posture of people who had been waiting 14 months and understood that waiting was the price of admission. At 8:56 a.m., the courtroom deputy, a woman in her 40s with close-cropped hair and a bearing that suggested prior military service, stepped to the front of the room. Courtroom deputy. All rise. The United States District Court for the District of South Carolina, Charleston Division, is now in session. The Honorable Judge Naomi R. Calloway presiding. The chamber door opened. 3 steps up to the bench. Black robes, pressed. Reading glasses on a chain. The same face, the same posture, the same measured gait, but framed now by mahogany and bronze, and the weight of federal authority. Naomi Calloway took her seat. She looked at the gallery, at the plaintiff's table, at the defense table. She did not look at Corbin Whitfield any longer than she looked at anyone else. The scan was even, professional, calibrated, the way a judge surveys a courtroom before speaking, the way she had done it 1,000 times, in 1,000 cases, with 1,000 defendants who did not know her and whom she did not know. Except this time, one of them did know her, or thought he did, or was beginning to. The neurons firing in slow, sickening succession, matching a face in black robes to a face on a terrace, matching the name on the brass plate at the front of the bench to the name on a booking confirmation that had been reassigned, matching the voice that was about to speak from a position of absolute authority to the voice that had said, 25 days ago, in a garden courtyard, "Thank you, Virgil. That would be kind." Corbin Whitfield did not faint. He did not collapse. He did not gasp or shout or do any of the things that people do in stories when confrontation arrives. What he did was stop moving. His hand, which had been reaching for a water glass, froze mid-motion. His jaw locked. The color left his face in stages, forehead first, then cheeks, then lips, the way blood retreats from skin when the body diverts it to organs that need it more urgently. His lungs, his heart. The parts of him that understood, before his conscious mind caught up, that something fundamental had just changed. His breathing altered, not faster, shallower. The kind of breathing that happens when the diaphragm forgets its assignment, and the ribs tighten, and the chest becomes a cage rather than a bellows. His hands, the same hands that had signed the acquisition papers for 11 properties, the same hands that had shaken the governor's hand at a fundraiser 6 weeks ago, the same hands that had never once in 58 years been placed in restraints, gripped the edge of the defense table with enough force to whiten the knuckles. Nash noticed, glanced at his client, glanced at the bench. His pen, which had been poised to take notes on the judge's demeanor, standard defense protocol, assess the judicial temperament before opening statements, stopped moving. He studied Whitfield's face. Then he looked at the bench again, this time more carefully, the way an attorney looks when something has shifted and he doesn't yet know what. The recognition came to Nash 7 seconds after it came to Whitfield, because Nash had not been at the resort, had not seen the woman on the terrace, had not been present for any of the encounters that were now colliding with this moment. He recognized the disconnect between his client's body and the room's normalcy. He processed the physical symptoms, pallor, rigidity, arrested breath, and arrived at the only logical conclusion. His client knew the judge, and not in a good way. Nash leaned 1 inch toward Whitfield, whispered, "Corbin, what is it?" Whitfield did not answer. His eyes were locked on the bench, on the face above the black robes, on the reading glasses resting on the chain, on the hands, the same hands that had freed themselves from Bryce Kendall's grip 3 weeks ago, now folding calmly on the judicial desk. "Good morning. This is Civil Action Number 2:23-CV-04891. The court has reviewed the parties' pretrial submissions. Before we proceed, are there any preliminary matters?" Her voice was level, professional, the same voice she had used at the front desk when reading her confirmation number, the same voice she had used on the terrace when Bryce Kendall's hand closed around her wrist. Nash rose. "No preliminary matters from the defense, Your Honor." Okafor rose. "None from the plaintiffs, Your Honor." "Very well. Counsel will proceed with opening statements. Ms. Okafor, whenever you're ready." "Il." Okafor began her opening. The gallery listened. The reporters wrote. The ceiling fans turned slowly above the courtroom, circulating air that smelled like wood polish and old precedent. Corbin Whitfield did not hear a word. He was staring at the bench, at the woman behind it, with an expression that had traveled past shock and arrived at something colder. Calculation. He leaned toward Nash, whispered. Nash's pen stopped moving. He looked at Whitfield, looked at the bench, looked at Whitfield again. Then he closed his eyes for 1 full second, the kind of pause that, in a man who bills at $800 an hour, represents a significant investment. He opened his trial binder, found a blank page, wrote 4 words, turned the page toward Whitfield. The 4 words were, "Do not say anything." Whitfield ignored them. When Okafor finished her opening and Naomi invited Nash to deliver his, Whitfield stood before Nash could. The attorney's hand shot out, grabbed his client's sleeve. But Whitfield pulled free. Corbin Whitfield. "Your Honor, I need to address something before we go further." "Mr. Whitfield, you are represented by counsel. If you wish to address the court, please do so through Mr. Nash." Corbin Whitfield. "This is personal. I know you. You were at my resort 3 weeks ago. You are the woman who—" Nash was on his feet. "Your Honor, I apologize. My client is—" "Mr. Whitfield, sit down." 2 words. No volume increase. No gavel. The command carried on the frequency of institutional authority, the kind that does not need to raise its voice because the architecture does the amplifying. Whitfield did not sit down. His face had passed through its bloodless phase and arrived at red. The particular red of humiliation, combined with the particular red of a man who is accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room and has just discovered, irrevocably, that he is not. "I'm not going to be judged by someone who was a guest at my property. This is a conflict of interest. I demand a different judge." Mr. Whitfield. In this courtroom, the law does not recognize net worth as grounds for exemption from basic decorum. You will stand when addressed, you will speak through counsel, or you will be held in contempt under 18 U.S.C. Section 401. This is your only warning. The courtroom went silent. Not the silence of discomfort, the silence of recognition. The silence that follows when something real has been said, something that cannot be unsaid, something that has rearranged the molecules in the room. Whitfield stood there, standing, technically compliant, vibrating with an energy that wanted to be rage but had nowhere to go. Nash took his arm, firmly, guided him into his chair. Everett. Nash. Your Honor, I respectfully request a brief recess to confer with my client. 15 minutes. We will resume at 9:32. Pierre. The recess lasted 15 minutes in clock time and approximately 4 years in Everett Nash's professional estimation. He took Whitfield to the attorney conference room on the second floor, closed the door, and did something he had not done in 37 years of practice. He raised his voice to a client. What was said in that room was not recorded, but the contours could be inferred from what followed. Nash needed to know everything. Every interaction, every word, every contact between Whitfield's employees and the woman now sitting on the bench above them. He needed it fast, and he needed it unvarnished, because the difference between a survivable legal problem and a catastrophic one often came down to what the attorney learned in the first 15 minutes versus what he learned 6 months later in a deposition transcript. Whitfield told him, not all of it, clients never tell all of it, but enough. The reservation reassignment, the side door directive, the cease and desist letter, the 911 call, Bryce, Tessa, the email. Nash's face, according to the one person who saw them leave the conference room, a junior associate from another firm who happened to be passing in the hallway, had the particular quality of controlled devastation that experienced attorneys display when the facts are very bad and the options are very few. When the door opened 14 minutes later, Whitfield's tie was loosened, and Nash was carrying a yellow legal pad with 6 pages of handwriting, a motion drafted in longhand that he would type and file within the hour. At 9:32 a.m., the courtroom reconvened. Nash rose before the judge could speak. Everett Nash. Your Honor, the defense moves for recusal under 28 U.S.C. Section 455, subsection A. We contend that Your Honor's impartiality might reasonably be questioned given a personal interaction with the defendant at one of the properties named in this litigation. There it was, the procedural weapon. Clean, legitimate, grounded in real law. Section 455 of Title 28, United States Code. A statute that requires a federal judge to disqualify herself in any proceeding in which her impartiality might reasonably be questioned. Nash was not wrong to file it. That was the difficult part. He was not wrong. A judge who has had a personal negative experience with the defendant, an experience that included, by some readings of the evidence, discrimination by the defendant's employees acting in the defendant's interest, has a legitimate recusal question. Defense attorneys know this. Prosecutors know this. Judges know this. The law exists precisely for situations where the line between personal experience and judicial neutrality becomes too thin to hold. Naomi Calloway knew it too. She had been expecting it. The motion is noted. The court will hear argument on the recusal motion before proceeding with the underlying case. Mr. Nash, you have 10 minutes. Ms. Okafor, you may respond. Nash argued, carefully, technically, without the bombast of a man who believes he is right, but with the precision of a man who believes he can win on procedure. He cited the facts. His client owned the resort. The judge had been a guest at the resort. The interaction had been, he chose the word carefully, contentious. Your Honor, Section 455 does not require actual bias. It requires only that an objective observer might reasonably question impartiality. Given the circumstances, we believe that standard is met. For responded. She was direct. Your Honor, the defense's motion conflates personal discomfort with legal disqualification. Section 455 requires a reasonable basis to question impartiality, not merely a prior encounter. The court's experience as a guest at the defendant's property is no different from any consumer who has interacted with a business later subject to litigation. If personal experience with a defendant's services were grounds for recusal, no judge who has ever eaten at a restaurant, stayed at a hotel, or shopped at a store could hear a case involving that establishment. She paused, then added, moreover, the defense's motion raises an ironic concern. If the defendant's employees engaged in discriminatory conduct toward the presiding judge, conduct consistent with the very pattern alleged in this lawsuit, then the motion to recuse effectively asks the court to reward that discrimination by removing the judge who experienced it. Nash objected. The objection was sustained on grounds of argumentative rhetoric, but the point had been made. The gallery heard it. The reporters wrote it down. The words sat in the air of the courtroom like smoke. Judge Calloway did not rule on the motion that morning. She scheduled a separate hearing, 48 hours later, June 26th, to consider the recusal question in full. She invited both parties to submit briefs. She ordered the trial proceedings stayed pending resolution of the motion. And then she did something that no one in the courtroom expected. Before we adjourn, the court wishes to place certain facts on the record. On May 29th through June 1st of this year, I was a registered guest at the Palmetto Shores Resort, a property owned and operated by the defendant, Whitfield Hospitality Group. During my stay, I experienced conduct that I believe may be relevant to the claims in this litigation. I do not offer this as testimony. I am not a witness in this case and will not serve as one. I offer it solely for the purpose of full disclosure, as required by Canon 3 of the Code of Conduct for United States Judges. She opened a folder, read from it. Dates, times, names. May 29th. I arrived at the resort at approximately 10:51 a.m. Despite holding a confirmed reservation for an Ocean View suite, I was directed to a side entrance by a staff member identified as Bryce Kendall. Front desk supervisor Tessa Holbrook informed me that no reservation existed under my name. The reservation was subsequently located after I presented my confirmation email. I was assigned a garden view room, not the suite I had booked. She turned a page. May 30th. I was asked by a resort guest, identified in my notes only as Margot, whether I was the new spa hire. I was not wearing a uniform or employee identification. I was wearing civilian clothes and carrying a personal beach bag. Another page. May 31st. I was asked to vacate an outdoor dining table on the grounds that it was reserved for VIP guests. No reservation placard was visible. The table adjacent to it, occupied by 2 white guests, bore no reservation placard either and was not disturbed. Another page. June 1st. I received a document styled as a cease and desist letter delivered to my room by Mr. Kendall. The letter demanded that I vacate the property. It bore no court seal, no case number, and no attorney signature. It was not, by any standard of legal practice, a valid legal instrument. She closed the folder, looked at the courtroom. Also on June 1st, Mr. Kendall seized my wrist during what I understood to be my departure from the property. I freed myself using minimal defensive contact. Mr. Kendall subsequently called 911 and reported me as a trespasser. Deputy Frank Moss, badge 2214, responded. No trespass notice, posted or written, was produced. I departed voluntarily. She paused, set her reading glasses on the bench. These facts are now part of the record. The court will consider the recusal motion with full transparency regarding these events. The question before the court is not whether these events occurred. They did. The question is whether they prevent me from adjudicating this case fairly. I will answer that question on June 26th. She stood. The courtroom stood with her. Court is adjourned. June 26th. The recusal hearing. Same courtroom, fuller gallery. The reporters had doubled. A crew from CNN affiliate WCSC had arrived. A legal correspondent from Reuters sat in the third row, laptop balanced on his knees. The hearing lasted 3 hours and 41 minutes. Nash presented his case methodically. He argued that the events at the resort constituted a personal interaction of adversarial nature that created an appearance of bias. He cited case law, Liddicky v. United States, 510 U.S. 540, for the proposition that judicial bias may arise from extrajudicial sources. He submitted affidavits from Tessa Holbrook and Bryce Kendall, both of whom described Naomi's behavior at the resort as confrontational and escalating. Okafor responded with evidence. She introduced, over Nash's objection, which was overruled, 4 documents obtained through the FOIA process and authenticated under Federal Rule of Evidence 901, B4. Document 1. The email from Tessa Holbrook to Bryce Kendall, dated May 29th, directing him to redirect Naomi to the side entrance at Mr. Whitfield's instruction. Document 2. The 911 call transcript showing Bryce's characterization of Naomi as confrontational, while the call itself revealed no posted trespass notice existed. Document 3. The billing invoice showing Deputy Moss's off-duty employment by the resort's security contractor. Document 4, and this was the one that shifted the room, was Deja Parsons' video. 11 seconds. Played on the courtroom monitor. Bryce Kendall's hand closing around Naomi's wrist as she moved toward the exit. Naomi's wrist rotation, Precise, controlled, unhurried. Bryce stumbling backward, Naomi standing still. The video was authenticated by Deja Parsons herself, who appeared via video link from a cousin's house in Savannah, Georgia. She had left the resort's employment 8 days after the incident. She testified, voice steady, hands clasped, that she had not been fired. She had been informed that her schedule was being restructured and that no shifts were available for the foreseeable future. She also testified that, on the morning after the incident, she had found a note in her employee locker, typed, unsigned, on plain paper. 3 sentences. Deja Parsons. It said, "Loyalty to Palmetto Shores is a condition of employment. Unauthorized recordings on resort property are grounds for immediate termination. This is a reminder, not a warning." Okafor let the testimony sit in the courtroom for 5 full seconds before speaking again. Denise Okafor. Your Honor, the defense argues that Your Honor's experience at the resort creates a reasonable question about impartiality. The plaintiffs submit that this evidence, the email directing staff to redirect a black guest, the fabricated trespass complaint, the off-duty financial relationship between the responding deputy and the resort, the retaliatory treatment of a witness, demonstrates that what Your Honor experienced was not an isolated interpersonal conflict. It was the very pattern of discrimination alleged in this lawsuit. Nash objected. The objection was noted for the record. Judge Calloway ruled on June 28th, 2 days after the hearing. The ruling was 7 pages, single-spaced, issued from chambers, and filed with the clerk at 8:14 a.m. She granted the motion. She recused herself, but not before writing, in the final 2 pages of her ruling, an analysis that would be cited in 4 subsequent federal cases and republished in the Yale Law Journal's online supplement. The ruling read, in part, "The court finds that the events of May 29th through June 1st, when viewed objectively, create an appearance that the court's impartiality might reasonably be questioned within the meaning of 28 U.S.C. Section 455, A. The court therefore grants the motion and recuses itself from this proceeding." However, the court notes that recusal does not, and must not, serve as a mechanism by which discriminatory conduct effectively selects the judiciary. If a pattern of discrimination can remove from the bench any judge who experiences that discrimination, then the remedy for bias becomes, itself, a tool of bias. The court urges future consideration of this paradox. The court further notes that the evidence presented at the June 26th hearing, including email communications directing the differential treatment of the undersigned, a fabricated trespass complaint, and the retaliatory treatment of a potential witness, raises concerns independent of this litigation. The court has referred this evidence, pursuant to its authority under 28 U.S.C. Section 1651 and Local Rule 83.1, to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Civil Rights Division, and to the Department of Justice Housing and Civil Rights Section, for such further action as those agencies deem appropriate. She recused. She stepped back. She gave up the case. But she did not give up the evidence. She sent it where it needed to go, to agencies that Corbin Whitfield's attorney could not file a motion against, to investigators who did not need Whitfield's permission to open his records, to a division of the federal government whose explicit purpose is to identify, document, and prosecute patterns of housing discrimination across the United States. She lost the battle. She redirected the war. Some fights can't be won in a single courtroom, but this judge made sure the evidence would outlive every motion to suppress it. Keep watching, because the system isn't done with this story. The case was reassigned. United States District Judge Marlon Gaines, 64 years old, 22 years on the bench, appointed by a different president, received the file on July 1st and scheduled a new pretrial conference for July 15th. The trial, the actual trial of the Fair Housing Act claims, was set for October, 4 months away. The kind of delay that costs plaintiffs money and hope in roughly equal measure. The kind of delay that defendant-side attorneys understand instinctively. Time is the most effective defense. But time was also working against Corbin Whitfield now, because the referral, Judge Calloway's referral to the FBI and DOJ, initiated a separate investigation. Not a lawsuit, not a civil complaint, a federal investigation into potential violations of the Fair Housing Act's criminal provisions, 42 U.S.C. Section 3631, which prohibits the use of force or threat of force to interfere with housing rights, and 18 U.S.C. Section 245, which prohibits interference with federally protected activities, including the use of public accommodations. The investigation was not public. It was not announced. Naomi learned of its existence through a 2-sentence letter from the DOJ Civil Rights Division, received at her chambers on July 8th, acknowledging receipt of her referral and stating that the matter has been assigned for preliminary review. Preliminary review, the bureaucratic equivalent of, "We are looking at this." Not a promise, not a commitment. A statement that a file exists, that someone has been assigned to it, that the machinery has begun to turn. Whether it would turn fast enough, far enough, or in the right direction, that was not something the letter could say. What the letter could not say, the consequences said for themselves, slowly, unevenly. The way consequences always arrive when institutions protect their own. Deputy Frank Moss was the subject of an internal review initiated by the Beaufort County Sheriff's Office Professional Standards Unit after Osei's article, published in the Charleston City paper on July 2nd under the headline, "Resort Guest Complaints Reveal Off-Duty Deputies' Financial Ties," generated enough public attention that the Sheriff's Office could no longer pretend it was not aware of the situation. The review took 11 weeks. Its findings, released in mid-September, concluded that Moss had failed to disclose a potential conflict of interest in responding to the 911 call and had omitted material facts from his incident report, specifically the absence of a posted trespass notice. The recommended discipline: written reprimand and mandatory retraining on conflict of interest disclosure requirements. Not suspension, not termination. A letter in a file and a class he would attend for 6 hours on a Saturday in October. Moss was not fired. He was not reassigned. He continued to work patrol in the same district that included the Palmetto Shores Resort. The off-duty security work was voluntarily discontinued, according to a statement from his attorney, a phrase that meant he stopped doing it before they made him stop doing it, which is the institutional equivalent of resigning before you're fired and claiming it was your idea. Bryce Kendall was terminated by the resort on July 19th. Not for the incident itself, but for what the resort's HR director described in the termination letter as failure to follow guest interaction protocols and unauthorized contact with law enforcement without management approval. The wording was careful. It blamed process, not prejudice. It protected the institution by sacrificing the individual while naming the infraction in terms that could not be construed as an admission of discrimination. Bryce filed for unemployment. It was initially denied. He appealed. The appeal was pending as of October. Tessa Holbrook was not terminated. She was reassigned to corporate training development at Whitfield Hospitality Group's regional office in Hilton Head, a position that removed her from guest-facing operations without the stigma of formal discipline. She continued to receive her full salary. She did not speak publicly about the incident. Her attorney issued a statement saying that Ms. Holbrook acted in accordance with management directives at all times and looks forward to contributing to the company's commitment to inclusive hospitality. The statement was 67 words long and contained the word commitment once and the word inclusive once and the word accountability 0 times. Margot Delaney was not an employee of the resort and was not subject to any disciplinary action. She remained a member of the resort's Diamond Circle guest program. She did not respond to OC's request for comment. Corbin Whitfield issued a statement through his corporate communications office. The statement was 4 paragraphs long. The first paragraph expressed deep concern about any guest experience that falls short of Whitfield Hospitality Group's standards of excellence. The second paragraph announced an immediate review of all guest interaction protocols across our portfolio of properties. The third paragraph stated that any employee found to have engaged in discriminatory conduct will be held accountable. The fourth paragraph contained the following sentence: Mr. Whitfield believes deeply in the principles of equal access and non-discrimination and looks forward to demonstrating that commitment through concrete action. The statement did not mention Naomi Calloway by name. It did not mention the email directing her room reassignment. It did not mention that the guest interaction protocols being reviewed were the same protocols that had been in place, unchanged, for 7 years. It did not mention the lawsuit. Everett Nash filed a disciplinary complaint with the South Carolina Office of Disciplinary Counsel against Naomi Calloway, alleging that she had prejudicially disclosed extrajudicial information in a pending proceeding. The complaint was reviewed. It was dismissed in 8 weeks with a 1-paragraph letter stating that the disclosure in question was consistent with Canon 3 obligations and does not constitute a violation of judicial ethics. Nash did not appeal the dismissal. He did not comment publicly. He continued to represent Whitfield in the Fair Housing Act litigation before Judge Gaines. October came. The leaves on the live oaks outside the Waring Judicial Center did not change color. Live oaks don't. But the light shifted, and the air lost its summer weight, and the tourists thinned, and Charleston settled into the quieter version of itself that locals preferred. The trial before Judge Gaines began on October 7th. It lasted 9 days. The evidence was extensive. The testimony was detailed. Deja Parsons testified, in person this time, not via video, and was cross-examined by Nash for 90 minutes. She did not waver. She presented her 11-second video. She presented the unsigned note from her locker. She presented her termination letter, which the court admitted over Nash's objection as evidence of retaliatory conduct. 6 other former employees of Whitfield Properties testified. 3 current employees testified under subpoena, with varying degrees of reluctance. An expert witness in hospitality industry discrimination, a professor from Cornell's School of Hotel Administration, testified about pattern and practice analysis. The jury deliberated for 2 days. They returned a verdict on October 18th. Liable. On 3 of 4 counts. Compensatory damages, $2. $3 million. Punitive damages, $4.1 million. Later reduced by Judge Gaines to $1.8 million under Eighth Amendment proportionality review. Whitfield Hospitality Group announced its intention to appeal. Nash filed the notice within 10 days. The appeal would take 18 months, minimum, possibly longer. The money, if it was ever paid, would go to the plaintiffs. The Beaufort County NAACP chapter, 3 individual complainants, and a community fund for legal aid services, if it was ever paid. Appeals are long. Settlements are common. The architecture of delay is patient and well-funded. But the trial was not the end. The FBI investigation, the one initiated by Judge Calloway's referral, continued through the fall and into the winter. It was not public. Its progress was not reported. Its existence was known only to the agents assigned, the prosecutors supervising, and the subjects who had received target letters, though which subjects had received target letters and how many was not disclosed. What was disclosed, in a filing made by the DOJ Civil Rights Division on November 15th, was that the Department of Justice had opened a formal pattern or practice investigation into Whitfield Hospitality Group's operations across all 11 properties. The investigation would examine employment practices, guest treatment protocols, security operations, and the company's relationship with local law enforcement agencies. A consent decree was proposed. Whitfield's corporate counsel rejected the initial terms. Negotiations were expected to last, and this is the phrase the DOJ used, several months. Several months. In federal investigation time, that meant a year, maybe 2. The machinery turns. It does not hurry. November 22nd, late afternoon. Naomi Calloway sat in her chambers, the same chambers she had worked in for 6 years, with the same view of the harbor and the same photograph of her mother on the credenza, and the same copy of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure on the shelf behind her desk. Her phone buzzed. A text from a number she did not recognize. No message, just a forwarded email, screenshot format. The screenshot showed a message with the following header: from redacted at whitfield-holdings.com to redacted at whitfield-holdings.com at whitfield-holdings.com at whitfield-holdings.com. Date, November 19th. Subject, RE liability exposure, Calloway incident. Board eyes only. The body of the email was blacked out. Every line, every word. Nothing visible except the subject line and the distribution. 4 recipients, all redacted, all at the same corporate domain. Who sent the screenshot? The number was untraceable, prepaid, purchased with cash at a gas station in Myrtle Beach. Activated once, used once. Who were the 4 recipients? Board members, presumably, but which ones? Whitfield Hospitality Group's board of directors had 9 members. 5 were Whitfield family. 4 were independent. The email went to 4 people. The math was ambiguous by design. What did the email say? No one outside the distribution list knew. The content was redacted. The subject line was all that remained, a phrase that contained 2 words that carried legal weight: liability and exposure. Words that boards use when they are not discussing how to do the right thing, but how to calculate the cost of having done the wrong thing. Naomi stared at the screenshot for a long time. Then she forwarded it, without comment, to the FBI agent assigned to the pattern or practice investigation. The agent acknowledged receipt. No further communication followed. The same week, Deja Parsons, now living in Savannah, working at a hotel that was not owned by Whitfield Hospitality Group, received an envelope at her cousin's address. No return address. Postmarked from Beaufort, South Carolina. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, unsigned, 3 sentences. The video you recorded is the property of Palmetto Shores Resort under the Employee Technology Agreement you signed upon hire. Continued possession and distribution of this recording may expose you to civil liability. We recommend that you delete all copies immediately. Deja read the letter twice. She set it on the kitchen table. She looked at her phone, at the video, still saved in her cloud backup, still in the folder labeled Personal. She did not delete it. She also did not know what she would do next. The letter was not a legal document. It was not signed by an attorney. It cited no statute, no case law, no specific provision of the employee agreement. It was a bluff. Or it wasn't. It was a threat. Or it wasn't. It existed in the gray space between intimidation and procedure, the space where powerful people operate because it allows them to deny intent while achieving effect. Deja put the letter in a drawer. She locked her phone. She went to work. The video remained. The letter remained. The question remained. December. Naomi Calloway presided over 3 cases that month. 2 sentencing hearings and a civil trial involving a maritime insurance dispute. She wrote opinions. She reviewed briefs. She attended a judicial conference panel on implicit bias in courtroom procedure, a topic she had been invited to speak on, she suspected, not because of her scholarship, but because of her recent visibility. She did not discuss the Whitfield case publicly. She did not grant interviews. She did not respond to the 17 media requests that her clerk logged between July and December. She drove home each evening along the same route, over the Ravenel Bridge, through Mount Pleasant, to the house on Sullivan's Island that she had purchased 11 years ago, with the money she earned as a partner at a litigation firm in Atlanta before the judicial appointment. The house had a porch that faced the ocean. She sat on it some evenings, when the weather allowed, and watched the water do what water does, move and recede and return, indifferent to the architectures built along its edges. Her phone rang one evening in mid-December. The caller ID showed Chambers, direct. She answered. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, she sat on the porch for a long time without moving. She had been offered, by the Chief Judge of the Fourth Circuit, in a call that was framed as informal, but was anything but, the opportunity to serve on an advisory panel for federal judicial ethics reform. The panel would examine, among other things, the question of how recusal standards interact with judicial experiences of discrimination. The paradox she had written about in her ruling: if discrimination can remove from the bench any judge who experiences that discrimination, then the remedy for bias becomes itself a tool of bias. Had been read, had been discussed, had generated, in the careful language of federal judicial administration, significant interest at the circuit level. She had not said yes. She had not said no. She had said she would think about it. She thought about it on the porch, with the ocean in front of her and the phone dark in her lap. The consent decree negotiations between the DOJ and Whitfield Hospitality Group continued into the new year. As of January 15th, no agreement had been reached. The DOJ's proposed terms included mandatory diversity training for all employees, an independent compliance monitor appointed for 3 years, quarterly reporting on guest complaints disaggregated by race, and a $1.2 million investment in community-based anti-discrimination programs. Whitfield's corporate counsel countered with voluntary training, internal compliance review, annual reporting with no racial disaggregation, and a $200,000 charitable donation to an organization of the company's choosing. The gap between those positions was not just financial, it was philosophical. It was the difference between accountability imposed from outside and accountability managed from within, between transparency and opacity, between the system changing and the system appearing to change while remaining, in its essential architecture, exactly as it was. The negotiations were expected to continue for, and this phrase appeared again, several months. Deputy Moss completed his retraining. He returned to full duty. He did not work off-duty security at the resort again, but the memo prohibiting it applied only to him, not to other deputies in the district. The structural arrangement, in which law enforcement officers were paid by the businesses they might later be called to protect, remained intact. Bryce Kendall's unemployment appeal was denied. He moved to Myrtle Beach. He did not file a wrongful termination claim. Tessa Holbrook remained in her corporate training position. She developed, according to the Whitfield Hospitality Group's Q4 internal newsletter, a new onboarding module focused on inclusive guest engagement. The module was scheduled for rollout in March, and Deja Parsons, the 23-year-old housekeeper who recorded 11 seconds of truth on a phone she held at her hip, still had the video, still had the unsigned letter in her drawer, still had not decided what to do with either. She had, however, done one thing. She had called Warren Osei, the journalist, and left a voicemail. She did not describe the letter. She did not mention the video. She said only, "Deja Parsons. Mr. Osei, this is Deja Parsons. You wrote the article about Palmetto Shores. I think we should talk. Not now. Soon. When I figure some things out." Osei saved the voicemail. He did not call back immediately. He understood, from years of working sources who were frightened and uncertain and caught between conscience and consequence, that soon meant exactly what it said. Not now. Not never. Soon. He could wait. On a Tuesday evening in late January, Naomi Calloway sat in her chambers after the building had emptied. The cleaning crew had finished the hallway. The security guard had made his 8 p.m. round. The only sound was the building itself, the settling of old beams, the hum of climate control, the particular silence of a courthouse after hours, when the arguments have ended and the evidence has been filed, and the weight of everything that happened inside those walls presses gently against the plaster. She opened her desk drawer. Inside was a manila folder, not a case file, not a brief, not a ruling. A personal folder. Inside it, the booking confirmation for Palmetto Shores Resort, the folio with the unauthorized charges, the comment card. She had made a copy before submitting the original, the photograph of the garden courtyard where Virgil had called her by name. She looked at these things the way a person looks at objects that have become artifacts. No longer receipts of an experience, but evidence of a turning point, proof that something happened, that it mattered, that it was not imagined. Then she closed the folder, put it back in the drawer. Her phone sat on the desk. One missed call, from a 202 area code she did not recognize. No voicemail. She did not return it. On the credenza behind her, next to the photograph of her mother, a new object had appeared sometime in the last 2 months. A small framed print, no larger than an index card, of a passage from the dissent in Plessy versus Ferguson. The passage read, "The law regards man as man and takes no account of his color when his civil rights as guaranteed by the supreme law of the land are involved." She had not hung it on the wall. She had not displayed it prominently. It sat where only she could see it, on the credenza behind her chair, facing the window. The harbor lights were on. The water moved. Somewhere across the city, in a corporate office that had once belonged to a man who believed his net worth exempted him from basic decorum, a server hummed with emails that had been sent and received and archived and, in at least one case, forwarded to a person who was never supposed to see them. The consent decree was unsigned. The appeal was unfiled. The pattern or practice investigation was open. Deja Parsons had not deleted the video. And the email, the one with the subject line that read, R.E. Liability Exposure, Callaway Incident, Board Eyes Only, remained exactly as it had arrived. 4 redacted recipients, a body of text no one outside the distribution list had ever read, and a subject line that contained, in 12 words, the particular anxiety of powerful people who have begun to suspect that the architecture they built to protect themselves is the same architecture that will, eventually, expose them. The lock on the chamber's door clicked twice, Naomi turning the deadbolt, then the knob lock, and then there was silence. The kind of silence that is not empty, the kind that holds everything that has not yet been said. The consent decree is unsigned. The investigation is open. The video still exists. And somewhere in a drawer in Savannah, an unsigned letter sits next to a phone that contains 11 seconds of truth. This story is not over. If you want to know what Deja decides, and whether the board email ever sees daylight, subscribe now. Some receipts don't have an expiration date. So, thank you for listening.
Thank you for taking the time to watch this video today. If you found the content helpful, please remember to like and subscribe so you won't miss our upcoming episodes. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment below. We are always here to listen.